Buenos días a todos. Disculpad las dificultades técnicas que han atrasado unos minutos el inicio de nuestro seminario con el profesor William Altman. Aquí quiero agradecer la presencia entre nosotros. Ha sido una feliz coincidencia que pudiera encontrarse en Europa y desplazarse a Valencia para introducirse en nuestros diálogos sobre los diálogos de Platón, una iniciativa que con el profesor Mercantil empezamos a llevar a cabo este año en la Escuela de Filosofía del Ateneo y que queremos que se mantenga a lo largo del tiempo con la idea de volver a leer todos los diálogos platónicos y saber así, al paso de aquella afirmación de Self-Contradiction que decía que sea lo que sea la filosofía, tiene que ver con el modo como leamos los diálogos de Platón. De manera que aprender a leer los diálogos de Platón es una manera de entender qué es la filosofía. Mis palabras son de agradecimiento, primero al profesor Altman, al profesor Torre, que está aquí con nosotros, que nos servirá para ir traduciendo la discusión que va a empezar inmediatamente, puesto que el profesor Altman me ha pedido que no empecemos directamente con su conferencia, sino con una serie de preguntas que va a haceros y que motivará una discusión. Por eso, los que estáis muy lejos deberéis acercaros para participar de este diálogo. En los diálogos platónicos siempre hay algunos que se quedan en silencio, que están un poco más lejos de la discusión. No obstante, todos ellos están en el diálogo. Naturalmente, mi agradecimiento va para las instituciones que han hecho posible esto. Me gustaría decir dos cosas esta mañana, aparte del agradecimiento institucional. La primera es que el Seminario de William Altman ha hecho posible que todas las instituciones que tienen algo que ver con la filosofía en la Ciudad de Valencia estén presentes esta mañana. Esto debería enorgullecernos, servir para que en el futuro iniciativas como esta puedan seguir realizándose. Lo segundo que quiero decir, y que es muy importante para presentar al profesor Altman, es lo siguiente. La mayor parte de quienes estamos aquí esta mañana somos profesores de enseñanza secundaria. El profesor Altman ha sido toda su vida profesor de enseñanza secundaria, high school, con el inconveniente añadido de que en el sistema educativo estadounidense la filosofía no forma parte del currículum de la enseñanza secundaria. Esto es importante por lo siguiente. La verdadera educación de un país se produce en el momento en que los estudiantes se encuentran en la secundaria. Es absurdo pensar que la universidad puede propiciar la cultura general que no se haya adquirido en los años extraordinarios que tienen los estudiantes en un bachillerato, que es el sistema de educación secundaria. El hecho de que esta mañana estemos aquí para hablar de Platón, tantos profesores de enseñanza secundaria, es sin duda un motivo de esfuerzo. No puedo interpretarlo de ninguna otra manera. Bien, dicho esto, quiero agradecer a la Universidad de Valencia, especialmente al profesor Vares, que acogiera esta iniciativa. Es una de las instituciones que inmediatamente se puso a nuestra disposición. Quiero agradecer también a la Universidad Católica, hoy representada aquí por el profesor Pérez, que respaldase también esta iniciativa. Y después la acogida formidable que Nieves Soriano y el CEFIRE, un instituto social, da a todo lo que estamos haciendo en la Escuela de Filosofía y que permite que muchos de vosotros estéis aquí, porque es un curso de formación del profesor. También quiero agradecer a la editorial Ateneo, que suele ayudarnos a editar cosas que ningún otro editor en España se atreve a editar. Y, naturalmente, a la Escuela de Filosofía del Ateneo de Valencia. Es como dar las gracias a mí mismo, pero entiendo que la escuela es siempre un grupo de gente que está ahí, que desde hace 2 años está tratando de hacer que la academia eterna de la que habla el profesor Altman no sea una imagen muy lejana, sino una realidad. Algo de esto dirá el profesor Altman a lo largo del día. Como sabéis, nuestra jornada se divide en 2 partes. Esta mañana tenemos una presentación de la tesis fuerte del profesor Altman sobre el cambio de paradigma a la hora de leer los diálogos de Platón y su proposición del orden de lectura, de reading order. Y esta tarde tenemos una conferencia muy bonita, muchos de vosotros la tendréis porque la hemos enviado por correo electrónico, sobre lo que precisamente he dicho un momento acerca de lo que puede enseñarnos los diálogos de Platón para enseñar filosofía. En el documento que tenéis aquí, y que enviamos a todos, hay una pequeña presentación del profesor Altman. Me gusta mucho pensar que es un profesor de high school, de la enseñanza secundaria, y lo que los americanos llaman un independent scholar, que es como hablar del American Scholar. Me llenó de alegría saber que su tatarabuelo fue compañero de pupitre de Ralph Waldo Emerson. Este vínculo entre Emerson, Platón y nosotros esta mañana es para mí especialmente relevante. Emerson es un platónico extraordinario, pero es el American Scholar, el Independent Scholar por excelencia. Me he permitido añadir una bibliografía del profesor Altman, su libro Ascent to the Beautiful, que es su último libro de los 5 que ha dedicado a los diálogos platónicos, examinado uno por uno. Lo ha terminado hace apenas 2 semanas y se publicará en breve. En la revista La Torre de Virrey hemos producido el artículo seminal que da origen a este seminario, el orden de lectura de los diálogos de Platón. Y si todo va bien, conseguiremos publicar un bellísimo libro que me ha pasado esta mañana sobre la guerra de secesión americana y los escritores clásicos de la literatura americana. Así que tenemos muchas horas por delante para hablar de filosofía y para que no hable solamente el profesor Altman. La idea es que esto sea una imagen de los diálogos de Platón. Muchísimas gracias a todos. Profesor Altman, muchas gracias. Thank you very much.
Gracias, Antonio, for that very kind introduction. I'll come back to you in a minute. I would first like to thank. Oh, okay. Can you hear? I would first like to thank the University of Valencia, especially the Faculty of Filosofía Education, Ciencia y Educación, and the Instituto Universitario de Investigación, Filosofía Edith Stein at the University of Valencia, for making it possible for me to be here. In addition, the Generalitat Valenciana, Sofia, for the support of the apoyo, and the Orden de Lectura. Yesterday I had the chance to go to the Escuela de Filosofía del Ateneo, and the Orden de Lectura, which brings us to the subject of our dear Professor Antonio Lastra, whose kindness, sympathy, and generosity is responsible for my need, and so my appreciation is profound, sincere. Thank you very much. I don't think I can come to Valencia without mentioning a man's name that I only really came across yesterday, but I would like to thank especially Juan Luis Diaz, a native of this great city, who was forced to leave Spain at an early age, and whose research women on education, his life for Aristotle, and his Jewish background make him a person of great interest to me and a great Valenciano. So in his memory, I would like to thank him and the city that gave him birth. There's never been any doubt in my mind that Valencia was the city in Spain that I most felt comfortable with, simply from literature. And like my Professor Pereira and like Juan Luis Vives, I too have been in exile from Spain for all of my life. This is my first time here, and I'm very grateful to you for your personal note, I would like to thank, in addition to Antonio, the gentleman I call Mr. Perfect, Fernando. Thank you for your hospitality, and your long-suffering girlfriend, Margaret. Thank you very much. My three graces, S. Marialba, inspiration and delight. Thank you very much for your kindness. And then I just recently had, in addition to the opportunity of meeting Mr. Rick at the Rick's Cafe, a great scholar, and will be my translator and helper, Professor McGee. It was a pleasure to meet you. Thank you for all your support for philosophy, and your comments to me personally, Professor Ferris, and Professor Watts. We have much to talk about, and it was a great pleasure to meet you, and I look forward to more conversation. Now, I am a big believer in odd numbers. And so the first odd number is 3, since of course 1 is not a number. And what I've decided then is to have the formal lecture be the middle of my presentation rather than the beginning. And so I once had a great professor who would begin his classes by saying, "Before I begin, are there any questions?" And that's the way I love to begin. Are there any topics that any of you would like to see discussed that I can make sure I talk about or that I can answer now? Is there anything that you would like to hear discussed? Thanks to Antonio, gracias a Antonio, informações sobre mim e meine obras, meine Werke sind commun. Merci bien. Je suis illiterate nos 3-4 linguagens. Inglês, mas com inspiração divina de amor, possível por mim a ser inteligível ou não muitas linguagens. No espírito de humildade e Öffentlichkeit, ich pergunto a vocês se pergunta por mim. Pergunta? Por favor.
¿Se oye? Es muy sencillo. ¿Hay alguna pregunta previa para el profesor Altman antes de empezar?
Please remember that I am a high school teacher. And I know perfectly well how to ask questions. And if you are not going to ask me any questions, I'm going to ask you some questions. So if that doesn't put the fear of God into you. Any questions? Okay, well then let me ask some questions then. Okay, so my subject is the Dialogues of Platón. And it's more specifically about the reading order of the Dialogues of Platón. And that's a question that has not been raised really very much since the time of Schleiermacher at the beginning of the 19th century. But in a sense, it's an inescapable question, since all of us who have read any dialogues have read them in an order, so that there are as many reading orders of the Platonic dialogues as there are people in this room. Assuming that is there anybody in this room that has never read a dialogue of Plato? That's my first question. Is there anybody in this room that has never read a dialogue of Plato? Okay, good. So, we don't have to worry about that. For all the rest of you, even if you've only read one, that then stands first in your de facto reading order. Now, everybody then has a de facto reading order. The question is there a reading order de jure in addition to a reading order de facto? And Plato, of course, is a very odd case in the history of classical literature, in the sense that his writings do not survive in the traditional order In other words, an astrologer and servant to Augustus and Tiberius by the name of Thrasyllus in the 1st century AD, put together the edition of Plato and the edition that they had come down to us. There is no question in my mind that it was not the traditional order, because he demoted Alcibiades Major to a very low status. He put all of the sexy, erotic dialogues deep buried into the order. I think we can show that he was a homophobic gentleman that was very embarrassed by the sexual qualities of the Symposium and the Phaedrus and the Alcibiades Major and the Hipparchus and the Alcibiades Minor. And by putting Euthyphro first, he did great damage to the study of Plato. So let me start there. How many of you have read the Dialogue Euthyphro?
¿Cuántos habéis leído el diálogo?
No, I don't. Put your hands up, please, if you've read the Dialogue Euthyphro.
Arriba si habéis leído.
That's a very small number. How about the Apologia Socratus? Oh, that gets more. That gets more. Got it. More. Let me see the hands. Got it. Good. Yeah, and so how about Criton? And how about Faith? Maybe even more than one, I would say. Okay, so that's the first tetralogy of Thrasyllus. Thrasyllus then, in the second tetralogy, put the much more complicated dialogues. But since there are very clear connections between the dialogues in his second and the dialogue in his first tetralogy, well, let's just try those out. I'll give you their names first. You can think about them. That's Carpulo, Epeus, Sophistes, and Politicus. So I know we were just discussing some of these dialogues. I think we were discussing them, weren't we, present? Yeah. So the Politicus is one of your favorites. How about the Cratylus? How many of you read that? Not many. Yeah, but some. And how about the Theaetetus? Many more for the Theaetetus. How about the Sophistes? About, if anything, more than for the Theaetetus. That's interesting. What an odd thing. And the Politicus? Just in case any of you want to leave early, I think that the most important discovery that comes from reading order is the realization that when you take the first tetralogy and you put Euthyphro in its proper place between Theaetetus and Sophos, because Plato could not have made it any more obvious than that Euthyphro immediately follows Theaetetus and that the Sophos takes place immediately after Euthyphro, that the most interesting effect of reading order is that you then go back to the first tetralogy, and after Politicus you put Apology of Socrates. If I say nothing else to you that means anything, perhaps you should translate this just to make sure everybody. No, I gotta say it. You know. So the most important result of reading order
El resultado más importante del orden de lectura
is that the dialogue philosopher is no longer missing.
es que el diálogo filósofo no se atrevía.
Plato does not allow the Eleatic stranger to deliver the dialogue.
Platón no permite al extranjero eleata hacer el diálogo.
But what reading order indicates
Lo que indica el orden del diálogo
is that the Apology of Socrates takes the place of where the philosopher should be. That the Apology of
y la
Socrates
apología de Sócrates
takes the place
toma el lugar
of where the philosopher ought to be.
en el que el filósofo debería estar.
That's the most important result of reading order.
El resultado más importante del orden de lectura.
Because it's very clear
Es muy claro, está muy claro.
and it indicates that Socrates was,
Indica que Sócrates era,
will be,
será,
and always will be
siempre será,
Plato's philosopher.
el filósofo de Platón.
Any questions? Okay, well, let's go on then. So we've now dealt with, I don't think I asked Politicus. That'll be smaller, won't it? How many have read Politicus? So, okay, then we move into the so-called third tetralogy. I just came from Paris, where we had a colloquium, a symposium about the Parmenides de Platón. How many of you have read the Parmenides? By the way, it might actually be good to ask, what is your favorite dialogue? Let me try that to modify the question a little bit. So the question is, what is your favorite dialogue? So let me start again. Is there anybody here that their favorite dialogue is the Euthyphron? No. And how about the Apology of Socrates? Is there anybody here that their favorite dialogue? Well, so you now see that by reading order, Plato would be very happy about that. Because he knows that os sofisticados, os aristotelicos, os complicados, he knows that they are going to prefer the Eleatic stranger, especialmente no mundo anglo-americano, a very sophisticated world, stamped by Gilbert Ryle and the specialists, the analytic philosophers of language. As Gilbert Ryle once said, if Plato was any kind of philosopher,
si Platón era una forma de filósofo,
he could not have long remained a faithless.
no hubiera tardado mucho, o no hubiera sido platonista mucho tiempo.
So, this point of view is very dominant in my part of the world, and the beauty is that those that like the Eleatic stranger, the friends of the sophist primarily, they try to explain the absence, the ausencia de filosofo, because the Eleatic stranger has already revealed in himself. He has demonstrated what the philosopher is, and therefore doesn't need to do it. Whereas in my approach, at the very moment, let's translate this, at the very moment that the foolish Athenians
En el preciso instante en que los tontos atenienses
are going to condemn Socrates to death,
condenar a Sócrates a muerte,
a crime against philosophy that we all deplore,
un crimen contra la filosofía que todos deploramos.
at that very moment,
En ese momento,
Plato gives an opportunity
Platón da una oportunidad
to his most sophisticated and intelligent readers.
a sus más sofisticados e inteligentes lectores.
Intelligent readers who deplore the Athenian morons
Los lectores inteligentes que abominan de los idiotas de Atenas.
gives them an opportunity to do exactly the same thing that the morons are doing.
Les da exactamente la misma oportunidad de hacer lo que hacen los idiotas atenienses.
By condemning Socrates
Condenando a Sócrates
to an outgrown stage of Plato's development.
a un estadio de sobredimensión platónica posterior. Espero que vosotros lo vayáis entendiendo.
So thank you, if I may speak on behalf of Plato, thank you for preferring the apology of Socrates. Is there anybody whose favorite dialogue is the Crito? Well, since I see no hand, I'll pretend that it's my favorite for right now and say that and by the way, at this point of my talk is for you. I'm just waiting for a question. I'm stalling for time, hoping that somebody is going to ask a question. So don't treat me like I'm giving a lecture. My lecture comes later. I'm asking for a question.
Recordad que está esperando a que alguien pregunte. Su
Okay,
tío viene después de que...
so I'll pretend that the nice thing about Crick, no. Oh, we got a question. Oh, no. No. Bernard, no. I mean from somebody other than you. We can say these for later. With Professor Antonio Lastra is a good friend of Leo Strauss, and I'm a friend, a qualified friend. Leo Strauss called himself a qualified friend of liberal democracy.
Se llamaba un amigo cualificado de la democracia liberal.
And I'm a qualified friend of Leo Strauss.
Y él es un amigo cualificado de Strauss.
Leo Strauss made the great discovery about the Kritos, which is that when the laws talk to Socrates, they suggest that he could go to a well-governed city like Crete or like Sparta. And of course, that's what the laws is. It's a dialogue in Crete with a Cretan and Spartan. In other words, if any of you had picked the Crito, I picked the Crito as my favorite dialogue because of Leo Strauss. Because Leo Strauss thought that the Athenian stranger was who Socrates would have been had he escaped from the jail cell.
Leo Strauss pensó que Sócrates sería el extranjero en los diálogos si él hubiera podido escapar de la celda.
By the way, that's very similar to my theory, that Callicles in Gorgias is who Plato would have been had he not met Socrates.
Callicles en Gorgias sería quien Platón hubiera sido si no hubiera conocido a Sócrates.
At any rate, the Crito and its relationship to the laws is an intimate one. And if anybody had preferred Crito, Plato would have smiled at that too, because what Strauss missed is that the Socrates who would escape from the jail cell, who would avoid death out of fear of it, who would have so cowardly determined to save his own skin, is the antithesis of Socrates. Not a different Socrates, not an alternative Socrates, the antithesis of Socrates.
Lo que se perdió Strauss era el hecho de que si Sócrates hubiera escapado de la celda y tan cobardemente hubiera salvado su propio pellejo, no sería otra versión de Sócrates, sino que sería la antítesis de Sócrates.
And I can't tell you how much it amuses me.
Y no podéis imaginaros lo que le divierte.
That the defenders of the Athenian stranger,
los defensores del extranjero,
praise him for his prefaces, preambulos to the laws. That they praise him for his preambulos to the laws.
Le alaban por los preámbulos a las leyes.
In complete ignorance
en completa ignorancia
of the fact that the greatest preamble to the laws
de que el más grande de los preámbulos de las leyes
is the speech of the laws
es el discurso de las leyes
in Plato's Crito.
En el Critón.
Okay, so how about the Phaedo? Well, come on, let's get some hands on the Phaedo. Come on, whose favorite dialogue is the Phaedo? Just one? Oh. Well, you know, look. With the Phaedo, like I said, Thrasyllus did great damage to Plato. There's an old saying that is attributed to Euclides, that there is no royal road to geometry.
Que no hay una carretera real, royal road.
Basilique Hodos.
No hay una carretera, digamos, principal, importante, fundamental a la geometría.
Really, actually, the word more is a shortcut.
Vale, como un atajo, perdón.
But Thrasyllus gave a shortcut to Plato.
Thrasyllus hizo un atajo hacia Platón.
By putting Euthyphro at the beginning of the solution. Because if you read Euthyphro and Apology and Crito, you think you're now ready to read the Phaedo.
Porque si leéis
if you read Euthyphro, Apology and Crito,
Apología y Critón, pensamos que estamos listos para.
You believe that is a preparación preparación adecuada a entender Platón. Pero diálogo muy complexo, alusiones a todos los diálogos anteriores. Lembrarse que por mí, pero el último diálogo de Platón, porque it's the end of the story, the final. My colleagues, they want to phileo, sophistes, políticos. They want some other end of the story, some complicated, analytically satisfying. But any good teacher knows that every story needs a good ending. And when Socrates drinks the hemlock, well, not only is that a good ending, but it puts the laws in its place. Because, by the way, anybody here like the laws of Plato? Is there anybody that has the laws as their favorite dialogue? All right. The laws. And of course, what's the favorite beverage of the Athenian stranger?
¿Cuál es la bebida favorita del extranjero ateniense?
I can't remember.
Okay. Does anybody know what the favorite beverage of the...
Maybe wine. He has told me.
That's true. Wine is the specific favorite beverage.
El vino es la bebida favorita.
When the Athenian stranger walks into Rick's cafe,
Cuando el extranjero ateniense entra en el café de Rick,
he orders one.
él pide vino, mientras Santo también.
When Socrates goes to the bar,
Cuando Sócrates va al bar,
he orders hemlock.
pide típica.
And interestingly enough,
Es interesante.
the specific antidote to hemlock
El antídoto específico para la cicuta es vino.
Plato tells us this in the dialogue Ulysses.
Platón lo dice en el Ulises.
Porque cuando padre era figlio, bebe hemlock comio, he would value greatly even the clay jar that contained wine.
Porque cuando desde el principio el padre me dijo que bebe cicuta, él alabará incluso la vasija que contuvo el vino. Imagino que porque era el vino que salva el vino.
By the way, any questions? Yeah? Let's go on. So we got to part of it. So is that it? So we found somebody with Thedo. But how about travels? Anybody has that as their favorite travel? I like that one quite a lot. Is there anybody in this room whose favorite pre-Socratic philosopher is Heraclitus?
Alguien cuyo filósofo presocrático favorito es Heráclito.
Well, then the Cratylus should be right up here.
El Cratylus, que será mucho bien.
It's Plato's most formal and interesting statement about Heraclitus.
Es el discurso, la forma en la que Platón habla más sobre Heráclito.
So I know I'm going to get some good answers on this. How about the Theaetetus? Whose favorite dialogue is the Theaetetus? No? Not at all. That's a great favorite of my English colleagues. They like that. Epistemology, the problems of sense perception. They like that. But not you. How about the Sophist then?
Heidegger.
What? Heidegger. Yeah, Heidegger. Yeah, that's true. You too? Yeah, Heidegger. The Heidegger is that. Volume 2 was on the inside.
Dice que es el segundo Heidegger, segundo volumen de Edición.
3 years from now, the International Symposium on Plato will be about the sophistes.
En 3 años el Simposio Internacional de Platón será sobre los sofistas.
They seem to only like the late dialogues.
De hecho, les gustan los últimos diálogos.
Note, by the way, that they're also late for me.
Sabe que también es último para él.
But not late in the sense that they were written late.
Pero no en el sentido de que fue escrito último,
but in the sense that they were studied late.
sino que fue escrito estudiado.
And that their purpose is to test.
Y el propósito es medir
whether you'll be loyal to Socrates and what he's taught,
si serás leal a Sócrates o no,
or whether, like the Athenian morons,
o si prefieres a los idiotas atenienses
you'll kill the greatest philosopher that ever died.
y matas al filósofo más grande que nunca murió.
I say the greatest philosopher who ever died,
Dice que nunca murió.
but I'm not sure that that's true. I mean, Gandhi died pretty well.
Dice, no creo que sea cierto. No creo que sea seguro de eso, porque Gandhi murió bastante bien.
Martin Luther King died pretty well too.
Martin Luther King también murió bastante bien.
There have been some great people that have died.
Ha habido muy buena gente que ha muerto.
And en los pensé a repetirnos este mismo. Ela ligar estudam, eu quero Kenneth, a guerra por Roma. Helden taught. You know, that was Herodotus said, call no man happy until he is dead. Call no man happy until he is dead.
No hay hombre feliz hasta que haya muerto. O no llames a un hombre feliz hasta que haya muerto.
And of course, Socrates in the Phaedo defines philosophy as the neleke anapu.
Y Sócrates llama a la muerte la preparación.
Any questions, by the way? Do we have any questions yet? Yeah.
Hola, buenos días. ¿Sí? Sí. A ver, ha usado la palabra idiotas en el sentido de los sofistas, supongo.
Seeing sophomorones, the sophistes are wise. They're sophoi, but they're also moron. So I think the word sophomoric gets them well. They clearly have intellectual capacities. They're not mute. They're not just simply morones. I feel comfortable with sophomorones.
A los cristianos sophomorones en el sentido de que eran sabios, sofos, pero también eran idiotas. Entonces, por tanto, hacían el ciclo un poco completo. No es que fueran ignorantes, sino que tenían una gran sabiduría, pero también una gran estupidez.
En ese sentido de estupidez, aunque eran sabios, entonces eran estúpidos respecto a Sócrates, era por el tema de la verdad, que suponemos que Sócrates es el símbolo de la teoría, porque a nivel práctico, bueno, no sé, lo he estado diciendo.
Sí, esta na oposición contra los sofistas que Sócrates se reveló. Los sofistas, por Platón, in spite of their errors,
Los sofistas, para Platón, a pesar de sus errores,
they made Platonic philosophy both possible and necessary.
hicieron la filosofía platónica tanto posible como necesario.
Gracias particularmente a relatividad de los valores, de absoluta relatividad, made it necessary for somebody with integridad, fidelidad, lealdad a Ateneo, aletheia, verdad, to rise and with the weapons of the sophists,
Con las armas de los sofistas,
to oppose them.
oponerse a ellos.
Así es, eso es. Ahí quería llegar, que creo que la contraposición de la palabra, que no sé si es palabra, es correctamente, de idiotas, no me no me hacía bien a mí, ¿no? Quiero decir, porque yo creo que hoy por hoy, en el posmodernismo, estamos viendo que las verdades absolutas están temblando.
Por la parte de traducción, sí, quizá idiota que se ocupa de sí mismo no sería más aceptado con el estúpido, bobo.
Bueno, sí, pero por el tema de la
Just a point of clarity is, you should translate this, is that I specifically used the word moron.
Él utilizó la palabra moron específicamente.
And I did not use the word idiot.
Y no utilizó la de idiota.
The word idiot is an important word, though.
La palabra idiota es importante.
Because since I think that the most important teaching instruction of Plato,
porque él considera que la enseñanza más importante de Platón
is the duty to return to the cave.
Es el deber de volver a la caverna.
And precisely to look beyond one's own private interests.
Y por tanto mirar más allá de los intereses privados de cada uno.
That Plato's entire philosophy is an attack against idiots.
Por tanto, la filosofía de Platón completa es un ataque contra los idiotas.
Porque an idiot is not a stupid person.
Porque un idiota no es un estúpido.
But merely somebody that is only interested in their own private life.
Sino que se interesa solamente en su
as in the word idiomas.
Como en idioma.
My private language.
Su idioma, su lenguaje privado.
Idiosyncrasy.
Idiosincrasia.
Etc.
Pero para Platón intenta imponer, cuando lees a Platón, el tema de que Sócrates es el símbolo, ¿no? El símbolo, los valores de Sócrates son los símbolos filosóficos, el tema de la verdad. Y hoy en día, es lo que yo quería, mi pregunta, ahora, por fin, es, ahora mismo, ¿se puede hablar de una verdad?
Well, I think that Plato's Socrates is it's not that Plato used Plato's Socrates is a symbol.
El Sócrates de Platón es un símbolo.
It was not the historical Socrates. It wasn't that Plato just simply said, this man represents everything I like.
No solo que Platón diga que este hombre representa todo lo que me gusta.
It was that a symbol of that man
era un símbolo de ese hombre.
Is capable of teaching my students everything I want them to learn.
Ese símbolo es capaz de enseñar a mis estudiantes todo lo que yo quiero que aprendan.
As far as postmodernism goes,
y en cuanto al postmodernismo,
I mean, if there was no intention of an author,
si no hubiera una intención,
if it is impossible to discover the intention of an author,
si es imposible descubrir la intención de un autor,
literature is dead.
La literatura no.
And Plato clearly had intentions.
Y Platón desde luego que tenía intención.
If we want to pronounce those intentions non-existent at the start,
si queremos decir que esas intenciones no existen desde el principio,
and look at the dialogues of Plato as so many jeux d'esprit,
y mirar los diálogos de Platón como unos cuantos jeux d'esprit,
we're welcome to do it.
Bienvenidos a hacerlo.
But we won't get much value out of Plato.
Pero no vamos a sacar mucho valor de Platón.
No, I take that back.
Lo retiro.
Plato was such a delightful genius.
Platón era un genio delicioso.
And his dialogues are so vastly entertaining.
Y sus diálogos son tremendamente
that we'll still get value out of them even if we misread them in that way.
Que todavía tendrán valor aunque los leamos incorrectamente.
As for postmodern, I would just say that for me, postmodern really means post-war.
Para él, postmoderno significa post-guerra.
And by war, I mean the First World War, la Primera Guerra Mundial. I don't think we've recovered from it yet.
No creo que nos hayamos recuperado de esa Primera Guerra Mundial todavía.
And I rest my case on the history of Spain.
Y expone su caso con la historia de España.
Because Spain managed to avoid participation in the First World War.
España fue capaz de evitar la participación en la Primera Guerra Mundial.
And then ripped itself apart 15 years later.
Y se destrozó a sí misma 50 años más tarde.
As if in penance for missing the First War.
Como sintiéndose mal por haberse perdido la Primera Guerra Mundial.
They gave themselves the Spanish Civil War.
Nos dimos a nosotros mismos la Guerra Civil Española.
So that values could be destroyed here as well.
Para que los valores también pudieran ser destruidos aquí.
So, to me, postmodern, it's just a made-up word that comes out of the horror of the trenches and the senselessness of the First World War.
Los modernos es una palabra que viene del horror de las trincheras y el sinsentido de la Primera Guerra Mundial.
But that's just my response to postmodern. Thank you for your question. Gracias, señor.
El profesor Altman, sobre este aspecto, ha escrito un libro extraordinario, Martin Heidegger, lo tenéis en la lista, Martin Heidegger and the Third World War, donde explica muy bien lo que acaba de decir. Por si alguien está interesado en leerse el tiempo como una oración funeral, para que aún no se nos recuerde. Torre.
Any other questions? All right, we got another one. Let's go.
Yo quería que me explicara la idea de que Platón se supone que fue un autor de feminismo y las dos señoras que fueron a su escuela iban vestidas con ropas masculinas. ¿Qué explicación me la da usted?
Exactamente.
¿No es una contradicción enorme?
The equality of women and the necessity of educating women equally with men is a direct result of Platonism. Because Platonism is...
La necesidad de educar a las mujeres como a los hombres es un resultado directo de la filosofía de Platón.
Okay, the simplest basis of Platonism
las bases más simples del platonismo
is the superiority of the alma to the corpo.
Están en la superioridad del alma frente al cuerpo.
And that men and women share the same soul.
Y las mujeres y los hombres comparten la misma.
And the differences corporeales. Now importante por filósofo Platón. Na verdade, as almas das mulheres mais simpáticas com o verdade platônica.
Considera que las almas de las mujeres son más simpáticas con las verdades platónicas.
Porque Platón creates
Crea una lucha
entre autoegoísmo e altruismo.
El egoísmo y el altruismo.
Porque as crianças, as mamas, instinto maternal, as mulheres sabem que todo mundo sabe, would know, seria saber se sophistas não vêm and persuaded us that selfishness is human nature.
Porque considera que la relación de las madres con sus niños, el ejercicio de la maternidad, posibilita a las mujeres saber antes si los sofistas nos hubieran convencido de cargarnos de nuestro propio egoísmo en lugar de el bien.
I believe that the basis of Plato's famous doctrine, we got you, we'll get you in just a minute. The basis of the doctrina of recollection
las bases de la doctrina de la
is the universal human awareness.
Es awareness.
The universal human realization, or
la capacidad universal del ser humano darse cuenta
that only a selfless action is noble.
¿no?
That only a selfless
que solamente una acción no pensando en el sí mismo, es decir, totalmente altruista, es noble.
There's nothing noble about serving yourself.
No hay nada noble sobre servirte a ti mismo.
And everybody knows it.
Y todo el mundo lo sabe.
A washerwoman knows it better than a professor of philosophy.
La lavandera lo sabe mejor que un profesor.
Everyone on the planet knows it.
Todo el mundo.
From China to Spain to the Antarctic to South Africa. Even the penguins know it.
Hasta los pingüinos lo saben.
Everybody knows it. And Plato doesn't directly say it because he's prompting you to say it for yourself.
Platón no lo dice porque está esperando a que lo digamos nosotros.
For me, Plato was very simple. The doctrinos, whether escritos or unscritos, is extremely simple.
La doctrina de Platón, tanto escrita como no escrita, es muy simple.
Be good to other people.
Sé buena con los demás.
And don't fear to die to improve the lives of others.
Y no tengas miedo a morir para mejorar la vida de los demás.
And if you get the chance to be Socrates,
Y si tienes la oportunidad
or you can follow in the footsteps of Christ Jesus,
de ser como Sócrates o seguir los pasos de Jesucristo.
if you can die the way Martin Luther King did or Gandhi did,
Si puedes morir como Luther King o Gandhi,
rejoice and be exceeding glad.
alégrate, regocíjate y estate contento por eso.
And I really don't think it's any more complicated.
Y él no cree que eso sea muy complicado. Bien, señor.
You got a question?
Si le he entendido bien, ha puesto la maternidad como ejemplo de conducta no altruista, no egoísta por parte de Platón.
Not so much in Plato. There are indications in the Symposium where it talks about, for example, the birds and smaller animals that are willing to fight for their young.
Hay indicaciones
That there are in the Symposium.
perdón, en el banquete hay indicaciones de que los pájaros, algunos otros animales,
But then he directly contradicts that Alcestis sacrificed herself for her husband for his sake.
que se sacrifican por sus crías y tal, pero en ese mismo momento contradice a alguien que se ha sacrificado por un pariente.
I believe that the first Platonist to really make maternal altruism the core of
El
Platonism
primer platonista que hizo la maternidad como el centro de ese platonismo,
was Marco Tullio Cicero.
Gracias
Grazie a morte sua figlia
a su hija
in childbirth.
en el momento de parto.
Yo la objeción que iba a poner es el libro quinto de la República, donde Platón proscribe para los guardianes la paternidad y maternidad convertidas en... ante el temor que las relaciones familiares sean una forma de egoísmo.
Very nice. Well, you know, the status of the city in the Republic is will be debated until the end of time.
El estatus de la polis en la República será discutido hasta el fin de los tiempos.
What I believe is that it is not the ideal, it is not Plato's ideal city.
Aunque él piensa que no es la ciudad ideal de Platón,
I agree with Antonio Lastra's friend Leo Strauss on this point.
Está de acuerdo con el amigo Antonio Strauss en este punto.
And that in fact, the city is better understood as the antithesis of Plato's political theory.
Y de hecho, la polis se entiende como la antítesis de la teoría política de Platón.
Not, by the way, because of modernity.
No por una cuestión de
Or because of communismo. And not because of communism.
no por el comunismo,
But principally, because in the city, philosophers will be compelled, they will be forced to take part in politics.
sino porque en una ciudad los filósofos estarán forzados, obligados a tomar parte en la política,
Which is the antithesis of what Plato regards justice to be.
lo que es la antítesis de lo que considera Platón que es la justicia.
Because true justice is only when the philosopher voluntarily decides to live a worse life for the better of other people.
Porque sería en todo caso cuando el filósofo voluntariamente toma partido para mejorar la vida de los demás, ¿no?
And it is that altruism
Y eso es el altruismo.
that is written into the allegory of the cave.
Está escrito en la alegoría de la cara.
Great question. Thank you very much. More?
Una nota aquí. En ocasiones cuando lo traduciendo se me pierde el hilo porque estoy más solo que traduzco. Si veis que no me entendéis, por favor, decírmelo, intento de nuevo. ¿Okay?
Estás haciendo muy bien. Lo estás haciendo muy bien.
Hola. A ver, desde su experiencia como profesor de secundaria, ¿cree que un diálogo como el Critias podría ser una buena introducción para las personas, los jóvenes en estas edades se sientan interesados o motivados a tanto conocer a los griegos como los escritos de Platón y después continuar estudiando, por no ser un escrito tan técnico o tan filosófico como pueden ser otros de los que están comparando ahora?
Me pregunta tu nombre.
Thank you for your question.
Te agradezco la pregunta.
I don't know if starting with the dialogue Critias would be the best place to start, but I do think that your interest in Critias is important.
No creo que sea el mejor lugar para empezar, pero creo que tu interés por ese diálogo es muy importante.
In the dialogue Protagoras, Critias and Alcibiades enter together.
En el Protágoras, Critias y Alcibiades entran juntos.
And in my reading order,
Su orden de lectura,
that marks the entrance of Critias in the dialogues of Plato.
ese marca el momento en que Critias entra en los diálogos de Platón.
Now, you can't understand why Critias and Alcibiades enter together
Puedes entender por qué los dos entran juntos,
unless you've read the first book of Xenophon's Memorabilia.
a no ser que hayas leído el primer libro de las memorias de Xenofonte.
I would then recommend that you start your students with the first book of Xenophon's Memorabilia,
Por tanto, te sugeriría que empezaras con tus estudiantes con el primer libro de memorias de Xenofonte.
then read the dialogue Charmides,
Entonces el Carmides,
and then read the Critias.
entonces Critias.
And if you want to be adventurous,
Y si quieres ser aventurero
then read the Politicos
y políticos después,
and some of the laws.
y algunos de las leyes.
Because the end of the Critias,
Porque al final de Critias,
where Plato prevents Critias from putting a speech in the mouth of Zeus,
donde Platón evita que Critias ponga un discurso en boca de Zeus,
as well he should do since Critias was an atheist,
bien hecho porque Critias era ateo,
that although he prevents Critias from making a speech for God,
por tanto evita que Critias haga un discurso en nombre de Dios,
he will allow the Athenian stranger to make it.
pero permite que el extranjero también se lo haga.
And that theological, political problem
Y ese problema teológico político
is a great concern of Plato's,
es una de las grandes preocupaciones de Platón.
for exactly the opposite reason it was concerned to Leo Strauss.
Exactamente por la cuestión opuesta por la que era importante para el extranjero.
That's for Antonio.
Eso es para el Antonio.
Great question. Thank you very much, Jose Manuel. Very nice question. I think it's a good idea because the students will be interested in Atlantis, and the students will be interested in the geography, and you can make them, make the model of the ring city. I think it's a very creative idea. It would just be better with a little advanced preparation that I suggested.
Dice que es una gran idea porque a los chavales les va a encantar el tema de la Atlántida e incluso les puede llevar a que dibujen la forma de la ciudad con sus distintos círculos, etc. Pero creo que requeriría esa pequeña introducción previa para que entendieran.
Go ahead.
Y además también otro aspecto que veo bastante llamativo es como los sacerdotes egipcios le toman el pelo al Solón diciéndole que les cuente su genealogía, a ver de qué dios o de qué proviene, y ellos dicen que provienen de otra cosa, provienen de un pueblo desaparecido, el más extenso, y encima de lo que decía antes del mismo. Perdón. El pueblo del que provienen, por los antepasados de los griegos, los egipcios, dicen que era el pueblo más extenso y que Dios huía por el resto de pueblos que había dado a luchar contra los que en teoría vivían en la tierra.
The article I wrote in 2010 that was translated by Señor Caballero,
que fue traducido por el señor Caballero.
In that, I went from the Critias directly to the Philetus.
Desde el Critias directo hacia el Filero.
And that was an error I discovered while writing the book.
Y se dio cuenta de que era un error mientras escribía el libro.
The book the dialogue that follows the Critias in my system now
El diálogo que sigue los Critias en su sistema
is the Phaedrus,
es el género,
particularmente because of the Egyptian connection.
Por la conexión egipcia.
In the Phaedrus,
en el Pedro,
Socrates, Phaedrus says to Socrates, "It is easy for you to invent Egyptian tales."
Pedro dice, Sócrates, es fácil para ti inventar cuentos egipcios.
And of course, the Egyptian tale is about the invention of the alphabet.
Por supuesto, el cuento egipcio sobre la invención del alfabeto.
The alphabet is the source of written records.
Y el alfabeto es la fuente de los
And it's the written records of Egypt
estos registros escritos egipcios
that make the Greeks children in the Critias and Ateneus.
Son los que tienen que ver con los niños griegos.
I mean, as is always the case in Plato, if you're really going to understand the Critias,
Si de verdad vas a entender las Critias,
you have to put it in the context of the dialogue that precedes and follows it.
tienes que ponerlo en el contexto de los diálogos que anteceden
In other words, in the context of Ateneo
en el
and
Ateneo.
Phaedrus. According to me. I mean, you're welcome to look at it any other way you want.
De acuerdo con su propia opinión. Pero que
But again, for the question, the Egyptian connection is crucial.
Pero la conexión egipcia es crucial.
Thank you. Excellent questions, though. Is there a question?
Quería preguntarle en realidad dos cuestiones. La primera de ellas es un tema con el que hemos discutido en varias ocasiones acerca de lo que significa el bien en Platón. ¿Cree usted que podemos encontrar algún concepto de bien en Platón? ¿O hemos de hacer un esfuerzo extraordinario para encontrarlo?
So, thank you very much for your question, Carlos. It is the principal discovery that I made while writing the last two volumes of my study.
El principal descubrimiento que ha hecho escribiendo los dos últimos volúmenes de sus estudios
Related to this very question.
relacionado con esta misma pregunta.
Because I was writing last the dialogues that end with the Republic. I was writing about the early dialogues that prepare the way for the Republic.
Estaba escribiendo sobre los diálogos que preparan el camino hacia la República.
And what I was able to discover was the reason why Plato doesn't need to say very much about the good.
Y el motivo, lo que él descubrió es que el motivo por el que Platón no necesita hablar demasiado sobre el bien.
And the reason that he doesn't need to say very much about the good is very simple.
Es muy simple.
Is that in dialogues, really beginning with Symposium,
Los diálogos empezando con el simposio,
where Diotima asks Socrates,
donde Diálogos pregunta a Sócrates,
what will you get from beautiful things?
¿qué obtienes de cosas bellas?
And Socrates says, I don't know.
Sócrates dice, no lo sabe.
He says, well, what will you get from good things?
Entonces, ¿qué obtienes de las cosas buenas?
Happiness.
Felicidad.
He can answer that.
Responder eso.
And of course, Aristotle will replace the good with eudaimonia.
Y por supuesto, Aristóteles reemplazará el bien por eudaimonia.
What I came to understand is that Plato is inviting some of his readers to follow the path of eudaimonia.
Entendí que Platón está invitando a algunos de sus lectores a seguir la senda de la eudaimonia.
He begins to do it in the Symposium.
Empieza a hacerlo en el simposio.
He does it in the Lysis.
Hace en el Lysis.
The two smartest Anglophone immoralists. Os dos más importantes y más inteligentes eudaimonistas socráticos de anglofonía, Christopher Rowe and Terry Penner, they believe that eudaimonia a proton filon in Lysis. In other words, in otras palabras que Platón era aristotélico no senso ético. Euthydemus, the next dialogue, where it's the Euthydemus has become the bedrock for the eudaimonistic reading of Socrates.
Hay una corriente angloparlante que considera que Platón era moralmente eudemonista y el siguiente diálogo sienta las bases para ese eudemonismo. El eutidemo es el fundamento de esa corriente.
But the Euthydemus remains a diálogo aporético.
No, sigue siendo un diálogo aporético.
And there are problems. So, for example, if knowledge is the only good,
y el problema es como que si el conocimiento es el único bien,
and if the purpose of knowledge is to secure our happiness,
y el propósito del conocimiento es asegurar nuestra felicidad,
well, then happiness is the only good.
Entonces la felicidad es el único bien.
And this circular argument,
Esta argumento circular,
Plato expects us to see.
Platón espera que lo veamos.
And therefore, the only thing that he needs to say about the good,
Y por tanto, lo único que necesita decir sobre el bien,
is that it's not the good for me.
es que no es el bien para mí,
It's the absolute good.
es el bien absoluto.
And therefore is capable of motivating altruistic behavior.
Y por tanto es capaz de motivar el comportamiento altruista.
Because it's not my own egoistic good.
Porque no es mi bien egoísta.
And Plato was such a great teacher
Un gran profesor
that he doesn't need to be complicated.
que no necesita ser complicado.
That's just very simple.
Muy sencillo.
Thank you for your question, Carlos.
La segunda cuestión,
The second question.
un amigo me dijo que sería interesante comenzar la lectura de Platón leyendo las leyes, porque no aparece Sócrates.
Yeah. Well, I've been talking about this with Antonio because Catherine Zuckert, who is probably the scholar whose work is the most similar to mine,
La profesora cuyo trabajo es más similar al suyo.
she's dealing with all the Platonic dialogues. She's arranging them in an order that has nothing to do with order of composition.
Ella está trabajando con todos los diálogos, está organizando un sistema que tiene que ver con el orden de composición de escritura.
And to that extent is my most important ally.
Y en ese sentido es su más importante aliado.
She puts the Parmenides early because Socrates is young in it.
Ella pone el Parmenides antes porque Sócrates es joven en ese diálogo.
And she puts the laws early because she believes there's no reference to anything later than pre-Socratic philosophy.
Y pone las leyes primero porque considera que no hay ninguna referencia en ese diálogo a nada posterior a los presocráticos.
With regard to the second claim that there's nothing in the laws that relates to pre-Socratic philosophy.
Con respecto a esa segundo de que no hay nada en ese diálogo.
I've really already given my position.
Ya ha dicho su posición.
Which is that it's not so much pre-Socratic.
Que no hay tanto de presocrático.
As anti-Socratic.
Como de anti-Socratic.
So that she's not wrong.
Ella no está equivocada.
But that in terms of reading order, the laws follows the credo and precedes the Phaedo.
Pero en el orden de lectura las leyes continúan al Critón y son antes.
And it also must follow Hominos. It also must follow the Manos.
Y también tiene que seguir al Minos.
And it must precede the Epinomis.
Y tiene que preceder al
So that's my response to the laws issue. By the way, that there is a specific reference in the laws to Athenian soldiers.
Hay una referencia específica en las leyes a los soldados atenienses.
Emerging from their boats.
Salen de sus naves, de sus botes.
To conduct guerrilla raids on the coast.
A llevar a cabo como racias estilo guerrilla en las costas.
To which Thucydides refers in the Peloponnesian War.
A las que se refieren ya en las guerras del Peloponeso.
That's the actual textual proof that Catherine Zucker is wrong.
Y esa es la prueba textual de que su colega se equivoca.
As for the Parmenides,
en cuanto a Parmenides,
do you know Amy Winehouse?
¿Conoces a Amy Winehouse?
Does anybody know Amy Winehouse? So, like, they say I've got to go to rehab.
Decía que ella debe ir a rehabilitación.
And I say no.
No.
I would paraphrase by saying,
él hace la paráfrasis.
Plato says we've got to read Parmenides.
Platón decía que debíamos leer el Parmenides.
I say no. Plato would have had no students in the academy.
Platón no hubiera tenido estudiantes en la academia.
Not one.
Ni siquiera uno.
If he had begun with the Parmenides.
Hubiera empezado con el Parmenides.
The Parmenides very obviously presupposes the Republic.
El Parmenides obviamente presupone la República.
And it must be read before the Phaedo.
Y debe ser leído antes del Phaedo.
If you read it after the Phaedo,
si lo lees después del Phaedo,
you'll think it refutes the Phaedo.
Pensarás que refuta el Phaedo.
It doesn't.
Y no lo hace.
I gave you the example of the apology of Socrates as the greatest proof of the greatest value of the reading order.
Os he dado el ejemplo de la apología de Sócrates como el mayor valor del orden de lectura de Platón.
The greatest innovation that the reading order brings.
La mayor innovación que trae este orden de lectura
is that instead of making Phaedo an outgrown stage of Plato's development,
es que en lugar de hacer el Phaedón un momento posterior, más elaborado de la filosofía de Platón,
corrected by what Socrates learned as a 20-year-old boy in the Parmenides,
corregido por lo que Sócrates, un Sócrates de 20 años, aprende en el Parmenides,
that it means that we should read the Phaedo.
Esto significa que deberíamos leer el Phaedón
with the third man argument in mind,
con el argumento del tercer hombre en mente,
and realize that the final proof in the Phaedo
y darse cuenta de que la prueba final en el Phaedón
is deceptive,
es engañosa,
because its weakness has already been revealed,
porque sus debilidades han sido reveladas
in the Parmenides and the Republic.
En el Parmenides y en la República.
After all, what Simmias wants to know, or excuse me, after all, what Hebes wants to know,
después de todo lo que quiere saber,
is that if he keeps returning to his body generation after generation,
y si él vuelve, sigue volviendo a su cuerpo generación tras generación,
then his soul will survive all those reincarnations.
Si su alma sobrevivirá todas esas reencarnaciones.
Whereas the true teaching of Plato,
mientras que la auténtica enseñanza de Platón es no quiero volver a mi cuerpo.
Two questions. Bingo, look at that. Go on, yeah.
Sorry, two questions.
Let's go.
On the race, no se te oye.
I'm fine. We've got one here and one there. One in the audience and this one here. questions at one time. A good element.
With two questions more and
Then
a
we'll stop.
little rest
Yeah.
before the lecture.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
When I started reading Plato's Dialogues, I didn't give so much importance to the reading order. I see now it's important, but then I thought, if there is any philosophy in these books, I should be able to receive it anyway. So, what happens if we read them randomly, in random order?
Well, the people will be reading Plato's dialogues randomly till the end of time. All I can say is that no matter how good a professor may be, that if you came into her final lecture on the first day, you would miss them. And I don't think Plato's any different. I think Plato is a genius, and I think he's a very entertaining guy. He's a brilliant dramatist, and is capable of creating very entertaining characters and situations. And I think he can be profitably read by somebody that reads the dialogues in any order. I merely think that he is most educationally read by considering the very clear clues he himself gives. Remember, I'm not trying to impose my concerns. I see clues, and I follow them. Working with the hypothesis that those clues exist, I've persuaded myself again and again that they do exist. I start from the assumption that they do. I have found that assumption proved again and again. In the case that we're talking about right now, with the Phaedo, there's 200 years of scholarship that makes Phaedo outgrown on the basis of Parmenides. Nothing I say is going to change that. I could maybe persuade a few people not to look at it that way. That would be a victory. It's not going to go away. Platonism will always have enemies. I think that's a really important thing to realize. And I think that, enemy number one is Aristotle. And the majority of people are never going to be Platonists. And that's okay. What I try to do is for that tiny minority of people that are going to be Platonists, I try to give them a few. Well, Plato was a wrestler, and I tried to give them a few moves, like a few little wrestling holds, like, just ways to knock developmentalism back a little bit, or just little clues that will allow you to, jujitsu your way out of the typical things that people say. And that's it. Thank you for your question, and thank you for the English. And we've got this gentleman.
Hago una pequeña resumencito de esto último. La compañera preguntaba si estaba interesada en los órdenes de la lectura correcta de los diálogos de Platón, y se preguntaba si leer Platón en cualquier forma no sería igualmente útil. Yo decía que, por muy bueno que sea el profesor, si tu primera clase a la que asistas es su última clase del curso, es difícil que tú puedas entender exactamente lo que está intentando decir. Y por tanto, lo que consideras que es para él es importante, que no intenta forzar esa visión en nadie, es poner el orden correcto. Considera que la mayor parte de la gente es antiplatonista, que el mayor antiplatonista sería Aristóteles, y lo que he intentado hacer es encontrar pruebas de que ese gran escritor nos dejaba ordenados esos diálogos de alguna forma. Él se intenta convencer a sí mismo, pero es que además, cuando lo estudia, se da cuenta de que encuentra pruebas de que ese orden sí que existe. Lo que comentara, él decía que Platón lo ve como un luchador, que por tanto él intenta ofrecerle algunas llaves para intentar zafarse de esa gente que pretende estudiar Platón sin ser verdaderamente platonista. Y lo que ofrece es precisamente un orden posible de lectura, pero que ese tema va a estar siempre ahí. Que el hecho de que él considere que el Fedón no está superado por un diálogo posterior, sino que está leído en un orden incorrecto, pues es una teoría que él propone, que se lleva 200 años considerando lo contrario, que se seguirá considerando lo contrario, pero que si puede convencer a Pedro IV, pues ni al suelo.
I
have two questions. The first one is, which is the main interest of Plato, ethical or metaphysical? And the second one is, could we follow the ethical and political ideas Plato without the ontology and epistemology?
Say that the second part again. Could we
follow the ideas, the ethical ideas, without the metaphysical, without, for example, the theory of ideas?
I can see you want that. No, I guess I'm willing to meet you halfway and say that he's primarily interested in ethics. But I do think that the ontology is very much in the support of the ethics. One of the characteristic features of my version of Platonism is that I don't think that Plato thought there was an idea of the big, or an idea of the equal, or an idea of the bed, or an idea of the shuttle, or of the ideal of the man. I believe that the ideas Plato was interested in are the good, the just, and the beautiful.
Una de las cosas importantes en su visión de Platón es que considera que las ideas importantes para Platón, las que existen, son el bien, la belleza, la justicia, y no hay una idea de grande.
But that those three ideas,
las tres ideas,
which I call the Trinity,
llama la Trinidad,
to leave it unclear whether they're three or one,
para no dejarlo claro si son actividad tres o una.
That those things really exist,
esas cosas de verdad existen,
and that they don't exist in our world,
y que no existen en nuestro mundo.
I don't think it's necessary to be a Platonist.
Y porque no existen en este mundo es por lo que él considera que es importante ser.
But the purpose of the ideas is not to explain the material world.
Pero el propósito de las ideas no es explicar el mundo.
And that's a major reason that you can see that the final argument in Phaedo,
y por eso puedes ver que el argumento más importante en el Phaedo
is merely, is flawed. Is flawed. Its value is dialectical because it's forcing you to realize its own weaknesses.
Su valor dialéctico es que te ayuda a darte cuenta de su propia debilidad.
Great question. I mean, the question you asked there is, that is the question. Like, that is the question.
La pregunta que se hecho es,
and I can, that what I hope is that if you're interested, what is your name, by the way? Carlos? Are you writing about Plato? Are you interested in this?
I'm interested, but only as a teacher, as a reader.
Okay, so what I would say is that if you're interested, and this is what I talked about in Paris, and at my academia.edu sites, there are a couple of papers on this, which is that what I've done is that I'm taking Aristotle's testimony that Plato regarded the mathematical objects as intermediate between the true ideas and sensible things.
Está tomando la posición aristotélica de que Platón consideraba los objetos matemáticos como algo intermedio entre el mundo sensible y las ideas.
I'm taking that not only to be true about mathematics,
y él considera que no solamente es cierto sobre las matemáticas,
but about all so-called one over many forms.
Sino también sobre las llamadas unas sobre muchas formas.
Like, for example, the idea of a man.
O la idea de hombre.
Which I take it to be abstracted.
Que considera que ha sido abstraída.
From all of the men in the world.
De todos los hombres del mundo.
And that's not what the good and the just and the beautiful are.
Y no es lo que lo bueno, lo justo y lo bello.
So I'm salvaging an idea-based Platonism.
Por tanto, está haciendo algo con una idea basada en el platonismo.
By extending the realm of the intermediates.
Extendiendo el campo de esos objetos intermedios.
Which I think is, so if I understand your question, Carlos, it's kind of like you kind of regarded the ontology as something of an embarrassment, that you're comfortable with the ethical aspects, but there are these ontological idea stuff that makes you uncomfortable.
Entendía que Carlos estaba a gusto con las ideas éticas de Platón, pero un poquito en desajusto con el rollo ontológico de Platón.
I share your sentiment, and what actually turns out, Carlos, is that the origin of that big, lush Platonic ideas, where there's like an idea of man and an idea of tree and an idea of fish and an idea of dog shit, like that Platonism comes directly out of the Timaeus.
Yo considero que esa idea de platonismo, la que hay una idea de árbol, de persona y de cacao,
and it is crucial to my reading of Plato.
Y que es crucial en su lectura de Platón.
That Timaeus does not speak for Plato.
Que Timeo no habla por Platón.
And that the most destructive words in the history of Platonism
Y las palabras más destructivas en la historia del platonismo
was when Aristotle wrote in the Physics,
fue cuando Aristóteles escribió en la física,
as Plato says in the Timaeus.
como Platón dice en el Timeo.
Good question. Okay, so I'll do the paper now.
Versus orden de composición. El profesor Altman irá leyendo la conferencia en inglés, la traducida. He tratado de enviársela a casi todos los presentes. Si alguien no la tiene y desea tenerla, pues en su correo electrónico se la enviaremos con mucho gusto. ¿Empezamos? ¿Nieves? ¿Sí? Muy bien.
Thank you, Antonio. Okay, a Platonic paradigm shift. Reading order versus order of composition. As the century of Hegel and Darwin, the 19th of the Christian era was fascinated by progress and development over time. And this fascination had a profound effect on the study of Plato, the great philosopher of what remains eternally unchanged and unchangeable. Thanks above all to Friedrich David Ernst Schleiermacher, who translated them, Plato's dialogues would emerge from the great philosophical efflorescence that corresponded roughly with Hegel's lifetime, and Beethoven's too, I might add, in a changed form. In an era dominated by great philosophical systems, there was a natural temptation to make Plato into a systematic philosopher. And by arguing that Phaedrus was not only the first dialogue Plato wrote, but also the kernel or seed from which his thought as a whole evolved. Schleiermacher shaped the subsequent reception of the dialogues in ways both positive and negative. On the negative side, his view that Phaedrus was the first dialogue Plato wrote was promptly and repeatedly rejected by later scholars. And that rejection led to the birth of the order of composition paradigm that attempted to arrange the dialogues in accordance with the order in which Plato wrote them, thus reconstituting them as the intellectual history of Plato's development. As a result, the philosopher of the unchanging was subjected to a series of investigations that aimed to show how he had changed and how, above all, he had progressed from an early Socratic phase, then had created the great Platonist manifestos of his middle period, the Symposium, the Phaedo, and the Republic, and finally had matured into a more critical philosopher in his later works, where Socrates is replaced by the Eleatic and Athenian strangers. On the positive side, and by that I mean only the aspect of his contribution that has proved lasting and enduring, not the one that was helpful to Plato. Schleiermacher paved the way for excluding a number of Platonic dialogues from the corpus Platonicum. His rejection of Alcibiades' nature was particularly important. To begin with, the authenticity of Alcibiades' major remains contested today. And we are all Schleiermacher's heirs to that unfortunate extent. As Schleiermacher was well aware, numerous ancient Platonists had regarded Alcibiades' major not as the first dialogue Plato wrote, Until the 19th century, nobody was much interested in that question. But the first dialogue, Beginners Ought to Read, regarding it as an excellent introduction to Plato's philosophy, as indeed it is. Bear in mind that although Schleiermacher believed that Phaedrus was the first dialogue Plato wrote, he also believed it was the right place to begin reading Plato, containing as it did the kernel from which his thought emerged and around which his system revolved. To that extent, then, Schleiermacher still had one foot in an older world of interpretation, an older tradition that organized the dialogues in relation to reading order, that other older paradigm, not to order of composition. Of course, there was only room for one first dialogue, but it was not only that an initial Phaedrus left no room for an initial Alcibiades. It was precisely this elementary dialogue simplicity that made it suspect to Schopenhauer. For in it there was no trace of the hen, kai, pan profundity, the dialectical coincidentia oppositorum of most every deep thinker that had inspired German philosophy since the revival of interest in Spinoza that began when Hegel and Schleiermacher were still boys. If I may just, it might be good to call on you just for a minute. These words, coincidentia oppositorum and hen kai pan, are extremely important because it is characteristic of the deepest thinkers that they try to make all things into one. They try to find a unifying force or thing to bind all things. Spinoza, the Stoics, even when they divide things, yin-yang, even when they divide things, they want to bring them together. Whereas Plato is keeping them apart. There's us, and there's something higher than us. But with the excision of Alcibiades Major, the notion that Plato was teaching boys and girls, if they dressed up like, as Professor said, teaching boys became progressively more inaccessible, especially since, along with Alcibiades Major, Schleiermacher denied the authenticity of Alcibiades Minor, Rivalis, Hippias Major, Hippias Minor, Ion, Menexenus, nor is that a complete list. What it is, however, is a list of the 7 elementary dialogues that stand first in my reconstruction of the reading order of Plato's dialogues. The paradigm shift I am proposing is to revive an ancient concern with reading order by using modern methods to reconstruct the order in which Plato intended the dialogues to be read, studied, and taught. Since I started with the word progress, a good way to understand the shift I am proposing is that it is no longer Plato's progress, but the student's progress. The student's progress through the dialogues Plato wrote for our instruction that now becomes the matter of primary concern. When I refer to modern methods, I am referring to the healthy trend in the study of Plato that pays attention to dramatic details. And for the sake of offering Rama Alivo to my friend Antonio Lastra, Leo Strauss has been extremely valuable in just this area. He's not the first to pay attention to the characters, but he was the smartest to have done so. And building on Stenzel and others, he by the simple remark that when Hamlet says to be or not to be, that does not mean that Shakespeare said it, is an insight that, although simple, had been sorely neglected by previous. So that's my olive branch to you. The study of Plato pays attention to dramatic details, historical settings, and especially his use of characters. Consider Plato's immortal Phaedo in this context. In a dramatic sense, it can only be Plato's last Socratic dialogue, even if the order of composition paradigm has made it a characteristically middle dialogue with respect to Plato's development. And when we find Apollodoros, the narrator of the Symposium, the Banquete, Menexenus, the friend of Lysis, who listened to Socrates reciting the funeral oration of Aspasia in the Menexenus, and Ctesippus, who defeats the heuristic sophists at their own game in Euphedemus, all of them present in the prison cell where Socrates will take his departure from us. Plato was helping us to see not only that these characters were truly devoted Socratics, but also why Plato's indication that Euthydemus follows Lysis in the reading order, because Ctesippus appears in both, is of the same kind that allows us to see why Lysis follows Symposium. The empirical or phenomenological basis of the paradigm shift I am proposing begins with the indisputable fact that the founder of the Academy was a teacher. In other words, no one can deny that Plato, who founded the Academy, was a teacher. That's fact number one. And lacking any evidence that illuminates how he taught there, I am proposing that the data that we do have, the 35 dialogues that were accepted as Platonic until Schleiermacher, should be used to fill in this evidentiary tabula rasa. Later today, I will be speaking more about the curricular hypothesis, but for now the important point to make is that instead of reading the dialogues in relation to order of composition, the alternative I am proposing is pedagogical and is anchored in the reality of Plato as a teacher. And I should say here that we're not well served in Spanish by the word profesor, which can either mean a professor at the university or a professor in high school. I didn't call my book Plato the Professor. I called it Plato the Teacher because in the United States, the word teacher automatically doesn't mean a professor. It's a humbler profession, which doesn't mean it's a less important one. Given how, now, two facts, and Plato's a teacher, founded the Academy as a teacher. Point number two. Given how teachable Plato's dialogues have proved themselves to be over more than 2 millennia, the most remarkable thing about the curricular hypothesis is the astounding fact that a 21st century secondary school teacher from the United States of America actually gets to be original for making a completely obvious proposal that it was the dialogues, the teachable dialogues of Plato, that Plato the teacher taught in the Academy. I mean, Plato talks a lot about theomoira. It would be impossible for me not to believe in theomoira, given the incredible gift that has been given to me to get to be original for proposing something so obvious. I mean, they often say there's no new idea under the sun, or like everything's been said. This ain't. This hasn't been said before, and yet, look, to me, it's obvious. It at least should have been proposed by somebody before. But luckily for me, gracias a Dios, it hasn't been. So, and that's why I'm in a good mood all the time. Now, so when I say I was a secondary school teacher, I'm a public school teacher too. Like, I didn't teach in a private academy. I didn't teach the Exeter Academy. I didn't teach the children of the rich. I taught anybody that came. And of course, Plato, as a great aristocrat, he could never have charged money at his academy, ever. He would have contradicted everything that he believed in. Anyway, he was not a sophist. So that means that anybody, even a 17-year-old doctor's son from Stagira, you know, a little boy that was more interested in fish than in philosophy, that he took him into the school too, and his name was Aristotle at the age of 17. And by the way, if any of you have ever been inclined to think that there was a great dialogue between Plato and Aristotle, please bear in mind that when Aristotle entered the academy at 17 years old, Plato was already 60. So, I don't, maybe some of you have had, if any of you have reached the ages of 60, maybe you have had some great dialogues with a 17-year-old kid, but probably not. You might have taught them some things. You might have gotten an insight or two from a bright one, but the idea that you were going to change your worldview on the basis of a kid from Stagira. Anyway, so it's just a miracle that I get to be original, I've already said that. Starting from this obvious hypothesis, the difficult thing is then to see how the dialogues could have been the curriculum of the academy. How could that have worked? And this means discovering the order in which they would be most effectively taught. Since I was in my 20s, I have been thinking about this question. And for the last 13 years, I have been writing and publishing about it, with my first publication from 2010 having recently been translated into Spanish by Jose Maria Jimenez Caballero. Is Senor Caballero here? Oh, well, thank you, Senor Caballero. This is naturally a great honor for me, and I am honored to be able to share with you today some of the results of my research. The amazing thing for me has been the philosophical significance of some of the clues Plato used to indicate reading order. And since it might appear that I am in a battle to the death, a zero-sum conflict with Schleiermacher, I want to mention that Schleiermacher proves himself to be a remarkably sensitive reader, remarkably sensitive to the kind of hints, Winke, and allusions on Deutelmann that Plato uses to indicate things like reading order. In the 2010 article, The Departure of Socrates from Agathon's house in the Banqueta to go to the Lyceum was taken as emblematic of how Plato indicates that Lysis, which begins with, I was on my way to the Lyceum, that how Lysis follows Symposium in the reading order. And I just mentioned how Ctesippus creates the link between Lysis and Euthydemus. For he learns in the second what Socrates falsely claims he had already taught Menexenus in the first. The Laches, the first in a series of virtue dialogues, takes place in the gymnasium, a gymnasium. Also the setting of Lysis and Euthydemus, as well as Charmides, the virtue dialogue that follows Laches, and begins with 3 references to the spectacle of the men fighting in armor that the company has just seen. 3 times Socrates has told us in Euthydemus that the Aristic brothers too are also experts as men fighting in armor. As for Charmides, its wartime setting, spanning the period from Potidaia, which is the battle that began the Great War with Sparta, that wrecked Plato's Athens, the period from Potidaia to 30 Tyrants, where Plato's relative Critias was responsible for so much evil, nicely rings the major events in Laches, a shorter period between the Battle of Delium and the terrible Sicilian expedition. As for the link between Charmides and Gordius, the hypothesis that the otherwise unknown but positively brilliant Callicles is who Plato would have been had it not been for Socrates, helps us to see that Plato is also the unnamed comrade to whom Socrates tells his story, the story of his infamous relatives Critias and Charmides. But my favorite link and the one of greatest philosophical importance, occurs after Republic in Phaedrus, when Socrates comments about the Eleatic calamities, who can make, for example, one turn into many, and generally turn anything, little by little, into its opposite, points forward to what we are about to see in Parmenides, itself a gymnastic exercise for Philebus. And as I said, I just come to you after a conference on the Parmenides in Paris, and only one paper, other than mine, mentioned the Phaedrus in the context of the Parmenides. 30 of them mentioned Socrates. One mentioned the Phaedrus. Now, naturally, I'd love to speak to you about all of these beautiful connections in more detail. They're beautiful. It's a beautiful structure. And I've just touched the surface of indicating the kind of clues or hints. In more detail while sitting around a table with a Greek text in front of us. But let the observation suffice for the present. The paradigm that I am proposing involves a different approach to reading Plato's beautifully written dialogues, as well as a different way of regarding our relationship to Plato. It's not that it's less critical, because I just now mentioned, you might remember, that the reader needs to be aware that Socrates falsely claims that Menexenus had learned heuristic from Lysis. And he promotes the misconception, clarified only in Phaedo, that it is Lysis and not Menexenus who was the more philosophical of the two friends in Lysis. Critical reading becomes even more important in the dialogues that follow the Republic, where I am proposing that we need to free ourselves from the uncritical assumption that, for example, Timaeus speaks for Plato, and, like the youngster Socrates describes in Republic 7 who misuse dialectic, tear his dialogues to shreds. This is an important point, that in Republic, Socrates says that we should only teach dialectic to old people that are 30 años, because if you give them a true discourse, they'll rip it apart. What Plato discovered is, I'll create deliberately false discourses, and when they tear those apart, they'll see the truth. This is a major thing I'll be talking about this afternoon, this evening. But the shift I am trying to describe is more personal. And to put it simply, it requires the ongoing assumption that Plato was not only a teacher, but that he was not only a teacher in an historical sense, but that he is still one, and more than that, that he is our teacher, and that we are learning still from him. And this again, this beautiful man, Antonio Lastra, in this book, Aprender Leyendo, which all of you should read, the ability of a man to create a work of philosophy based on nothing more, apparently, than a series of reviews of other men's books, in fact, shows a truly philosophical spirit and exemplifies what it means to learn through reading. As I was just speaking with Rick, I think Plato thinks you can learn everything there is to learn about philosophy by reading his dialogues, if you learn how to read them. And I'm lesendes lernen, in the phrase of Strauss. And again, another rama vivo is that Strauss was, and I believe it's why he loved him, I believe it's what's lovable in him, is that he genuinely humbled himself to the books he was reading and tried to figure out what they were teaching him, instead of historicizing them or limiting them or saying, this is an example of the Greek mind at work. He assumed that they were saying something important and tried to determine what it was. And to that extent, we are all in his debt. Because that's the way to read the Bible, and to read Homer, and to read Plato, and to read Xenophon, and to read Cicero, to read anybody worth reading. And I don't remember, I think, who was the signora that asked the question about postmodernism? Was that you? I don't know. I thought she's looking at something. For there to be a lesen des Lernen, to be able to aprender leyendo, it is necessary to realize that every author has a purpose. Now, this book, he's such a modest and beautiful man that it appears not to have a purpose. I mean, like, it appears to just be, oh, it's just a collection of my reviews. But what he's actually demonstrating is that by thoughtfully reading all of these books and entering into dialogue with them, that he is modeling what it means to be a philosopher in a way that is truly Platonic. Because it appears to be, oh, it's just a collection of reviews. And yet it instantiates exactly its purpose. Thank you. He is our teacher, and that we are even now learning from him. Famously opaque, obscuro, difficult, thanks to the dialogue form, one comes to see him more clearly in the connections between his dialogues. That's one of my innovations, is that Plato is the guy that puts Phaedrus after Critias, or puts Timaeus after Republic. That you can see him more clearly in his puzzles than anywhere else. I think I get into that. For example, Plato is the guy who wants you to try to figure out the identity of that absent king who was supposed to join Critias, Hermocrates, and Timaeus at the start of Timaeus. Plato is and I looked these words up, Plato is a sembrador des semillas. He is a creador de rompecabezas. And once we decide that he is our teacher, he repeatedly, and consistently proves that he's the best of teachers. There's not a better teacher. And it's almost like recollection. Does everybody actually knows that? In Russian, in Chinese, you still use the word academic. But Plato has created the vocabulary. Idea, academic, philosopher, sophist. But what do you need to know? The paradigm shift, then, is that those who have investigated the dialogues in order to reconstruct the order of composition, and note that regardless of paradigm, ordering the dialogues is something people like to do. In other words, as long as there are these dialogues, people are going to try to put them into order. I think mine is more respectful. In fact, respectful, I think, is the key word. What do I would say that in Spanish? Respetuoso. It's treating him as your teacher. It's like saying, you know, I'm going to read this old book. I'm not going to read it as a curiosity, a historical curiosity. I'm going to read it as if it had something to teach me. That those that tried to do it have treated Plato as merely a historical phenomenon, and his corpus as a desiccated corpse from which, by means of the proper anatomical instruments, we can extract much about the development of his thought, the sources that he used, and the changes of opinion that marked the mature man. Changes, by the way, that always seem to tend toward what I call the telos aristotelico des disinvolvimento pensa de Platón. Instead of reading him as a student reads a teacher, then, we have come to analyzing him the way a doctor examines a patient. No. The way an anatomista examines a cadaver. And that includes amputating some of his limbs, as our various scholarly doctors see fit. Since the ancient Neoplatonist commentators Iamblichus, Proclus, Damascius, Olympiodorus considered, and very nearly rightly in my judgment, that Alcibiades is the best place to begin reading Plato, I began with Schleiermacher's decision to cut it out. But even though Schleiermacher himself cut off many more of them, 9 dialogues remain among the spuria or dubia today. And one of the real pleasures of reconstructing the reading order is that it finds a Platonic place for all of them. And I regard this as proof of their authenticity. What I want to emphasize today is that those 9 fall neatly into 3 groups of 3. Hipparchus, Minos, and Epinomis belong near the end of the reading order, just as Alcibiades Major, Alcibiades Minor, and Rivales belong at the beginning. Before remarking on the middle group, it is noteworthy that 4 of the 6 dialogues I just mentioned are obvious pairs, i.e. the Alcibiades pair, as well as Hipparchus Minos, and that a 5th, Epinomis, becomes one of another pair when rejoined with Laws. Thrasyllus' edition of dialogues, the form in which they have come down to us, famously organizes the dialogues in grupos de quattro, tetralogies, and before that, Aristophanes of Byzantium organized them into trilogies. But it is the dyad that Plato uses again and again, not only in Hippias Major, Hippias Minor, but more importantly in Timaeus Critias and Sophist Statesman. On the other hand, the best evidence for a Platonic tetralogy has now been deprived of its basis. By regarding Cleitophon as spurious, it has become impossible to see the Cleitophon Republic as a pair, joined to Timaeus Critias. Cleitophon belongs to the middle group of the 3 I mentioned, along with Theages and Letters, with the first of these found between Gorgias and Meno, that's Theages. It prepares for the role of divine dispensation or theomoira. And that is, the modern reception of Plato is not going to bring back the Alcibiades Major or Theages for exactly this reason. We are uncomfortable with the notion of theomoira, and Plato clearly was not uncomfortable with it. So it's just a clear example of how our post-war atheism and the decay of our values and the end of idealism has just wrought havoc on Plato. It's not Plato's fault that the British and the Germans and the French guys slaughtered themselves for 4 years on the Western Front. Plato's not responsible for that. Even though a lot of the boys that went and fought were Platonists and might not have gone so nobly if they weren't. Still, it was their leaders that misled them, not them. Both Polus and Gorgias are mentioned in it as well. Plato's letters, that's a very interesting case. Containing 13 letters, the collection possesses what Republic lacks, a center. So the Republic is made up of 10 books. 10 is an even number. It has no center. But But if you put the letters in between the first 5 and the last 5 books of the Republic, not only does it have a center, but the 7th letter becomes the center. And there's a very close connection between the 7th letter and the Republic, as I think I'm about to explain. Since the 7th letter is by far the longest and most important of the 13, it is interesting that it is also central. At the end of Republic 5, Socrates famously remarks that until kings philosophize, or philosophers become rulers or kings, there will be no relief for our cities. Taken as a literary whole, rather than as a series of historical documents, Plato's letters, I am tempted to call it the world's first epistolary novel, but that honor actually belongs to another Platonic or semi-Platonic work called the Letters of Chion and Heracleia that I'll be talking about tonight, shows that Plato's own expedition to Sicily, his own attempt to convert the king, that easier path, because you only have to do it with one guy, just change one guy, that Plato's path, that easier path, resulted in a complete failure, an absolute failure. And since it proved impossible to turn a king into a philosopher, our last best hope is to train philosophers to rise to positions of leadership, something they can only do in a democracy like Athens, a republic like Cicero's Rome, my own troubled homeland, or in a constitutional monarchy like the one that I have the honor to be visiting today. When read between Republic 5 and 6, Plato's letters prepare us for the only solution that remains. Philosophers must go back down into the dangerous cave of political life and fight against tyranny, the only thing worse than the always imperfect democracy that alone makes such a choice possible. And this, I take it, is what Plato the teacher was teaching us to do. And it is revealing that in antiquity, nobody questioned what virtually no modern scholar any longer accepts, that Demosthenes, the great patriot and enemy of Macedon, was one of Plato's students. The hypothesis that the enigmatic dialogues constitute the Academy's curriculum explains why there can be no unanimity about what Plato was teaching us. Made explicit in the parables of Jesus, Plato is always whispering the words, "Let those that have eyes, let them see. Let those that have ears, let them hear." In Alcibiades Major, for example, after Socrates proves that the ambitious youngster has neither been taught what justice is, nor, since there was never a time when he didn't think he already knew what it was, could he ever have set about trying to discover it for himself. In other words, he's neither been taught it, nor has he ever looked for it. And Socrates proves that he's never looked for it, because there never was a time that he didn't think he already knew. So he can't know what justice is. At that moment, Alcibiades changes his tune and suggests that an effective politician need not know what is just, but only what is expedient, i.e., not what is dikaion, but only what is souveron. In the argument that follows, Socrates uses a fallacious argument based on the ambiguity of the Greek phrase eupraten, which literally means to do well, but colloquially means to be happy. Now, I apologize for speaking in English, but you don't have to have seen a lot of American movies. Like when somebody says, "Hey man, how you doing?" And the guy says, "I'm doing good." That does not mean I'm a benevolent, I am assisting old ladies across the street. It just means I am happy. How you doing? I'm doing good. Of course, what doing good literally means is I'm doing good deeds, like I'm a philanthropist. As in The Wizard of Oz. Do you remember that one? Back when I come from, We have men that do good deeds all day. They are called good deed doers. So when you say, I'm doing good, it doesn't actually mean you're doing noble, virtuous things. Plato does exactly the same thing. The word euprotein literally means to do good, virtuous, and noble deeds. But colloquially, it just means, I'm doing good. How you doing? I'm doing good. Doing good. Here, give me a beer. I'm doing good. Yeah. Doing good. How you doing? Doing good. So in the Alcibiades nature, what Socrates does is he uses this equivocabus, this ambiguity between these two different meanings of euprotein, to prove that since to die in battle, rescuing others is to do beautifully, and since to do beautifully is to do well, that those who do well are happy. And since happiness is made possible by having good things, and since good things are things that are advantageous to us, even an act of self-sacrifice is advantageous. This argument is so palpably erroneous that when you see it on the page, that Plato's students recognized it as such from the start. And Plato would continue to play on the ambiguity of euprotein throughout all of the dialogues up until the Republic. It is the clue. What did I call it? What was the Spanish word for a clue? What? Oh, pista. Oh, pista. Yeah, it is a pista, that's right. Yeah, it is a pista. That it's more than that. It's like a key that again and again opens the door to his deliberate use of falsehood. Even in an early dialogue, then, Plato expects us to detect the use of equivocation, deception, and deliberate false speaking. And what makes this all the more remarkable is that before Alcibiades resorts to dividing what is just from what is expedient, he proposes that he has learned justice and has done so from the many in the very same way that he learned to speak Greek. The remarkable thing here is that in Protagoras, where Socrates describes his contest with the most famous sophist in Greece, Protagoras uses this very same argument that learning Greek, in other words, that we've all learned justice, we learn about it the same way we learn how to speak our native language. We hear it spoken, we assimilate it, and we learn it. He uses the same argument, and among the very few things that this brilliant but confusing dialogue, Protagoras, this brilliant but confusing dialogue makes crystal clear, is that Alcibiades was there to hear it. This then is Plato's clue, his pista, that Protagoras, which begins at dawn and literally means in Greek what might be called first speaking, precedes Alcibiades Major in the reading order of Plato's dialogues. Protagoras has become the most important dialogue for reconstructing the philosophy of Socrates, a project championed in the Anglophone world by Gregory Blasphus. All of the famous Socratic paradoxes are found here. Nobody makes a mistake willingly, virtue is one, and above all the view that virtue is knowledge. Of course, Blasphus was hardly original in emphasizing Protagoras. It was Aristotle who quoted it in his Nicomachean Ethics to show why Socrates denied akrasia, in other words, the weakness of will, where you can know the right thing to do and yet not do it. And upheld the power of knowledge. In the order of composition paradigm, Protagoras, along with virtue dialogues like Laches, Charmides, and Euthyphro, and importantly supplemented by Blasphus's more radical followers by Lysis and Euthydemus, have used the early dialogues to construct a pre-Platonist Plato, who remains Socratic in the same way that Aristotle describes Socrates, and that means as importantly dependent on what we find in Protagoras. This has required dividing Plato's Socrates into two. The Socrates of the Protagoras is the real Socrates. The Socrates who divides the soul into three parts in Republic 4, is now Plato. In the order of composition paradigm, then, the early dialogues are Socratic and pre-Platonist, with no trace of the theory of ideas, including the idea of the good as described in Republic 7. In fact, the good at which the unitary virtue always aims, the goal that explains why no one would ever mistake willingly in pursuing it, is happiness, or eudaimonia. And to achieve it, we need only know what is good or bad for us. In the reading order paradigm, by contrast, Plato begins with Protagoras because it is a lively drama with an intellectual boxing match at its center, an agon or contest that would capture the attention of any youngster and gives rise to a whole series of questions, including whether the academy itself has any real purpose, because if virtue cannot be taught, as Socrates suggests, then what the hell are we doing here? In the order of composition paradigm, the three dialogues that point to Platonism as Plato's answer to this question are grouped together as his middle period dialogues. Following the clues that Plato has sown in his dialogues, that's Plato the Sembrador, the reading order alternative places them at pivotal moments in the student's academic progress, closely tied to the initial Protagoras, where Phaedrus, Eryximachus, Pausanias, and Agathon are named but do not speak. Banquete brings them to life, and with the drunken confession of Alcibiades, we finally learn what even the dullest of Plato's young students had been dying to know since Protagoras, Alcibiades Major, and Alcibiades Minor. No, my son, no, Socrates is not having sex with the beautiful Alcibiades. Since Diotima, before allowing us to catch sight of the idea of beauty, opens the door to the view that the good is our own personal eudaimonia, the gymnastic dialogues between Symposium and Republic lead up to the center of Plato's thought. For the idea of the good is precisely and simply what is absolutely good, and thus not what is merely good for me. Laying down the division between unchanging being and the flux of becoming, Republic is the fortress of Platonism. And in the reading order, it stands 18th out of 35, i.e. in the middle, just as Symposium stands 9th among the 17 dialogues that precede it. But the greatest contrast between reading order and order composition involves the placement of Phaedo. Thrasyllus famously placed Euthyphro, Apology, Crito, and Phaedo at the beginning of his edition, and 3 of them have remained early in the dominant paradigm today. In the reading order, however, they are the conclusion of the story of Socrates. And that means, among other things, that Plato's readers have already studied Parmenides before Socrates treats the big as a form on the same level as the good and the beautiful in Phaedo. Since there is far more Platonism in Phaedo than can be found in its final argument, for example, Socrates' serene coolness in the face of the soul's separation from the body, there is no basis in the reading order paradigm to condemn this immortal dialogue to an outgrown stage of Plato's development. But the proof that the dialogues about the trial and death of Socrates belong at the end is not merely that it is the only fitting way to finish the story. The notoriously late Eleatic stranger dialogues, Sophist and Statesman, clearly follow Euthyphro, itself preceded by Theaetetus, In the order of composition paradigm, the obvious dramatic connections that create a series of dialogues, beginning with Theaetetus and ending with Phaedo, are ignored. Instead, Theaetetus, sophist, statesman are late, Euthyphro, apology, Crito are early. Perhaps the most elegant result, and pardon me for repeating myself as I said it earlier, the most elegant result of considering the dialogues in terms of reading order is that it clears up the mystery of the missing dialogue philosophos, the philosopher. At the beginning of Sophists, the Eleatic stranger, at Socrates' request, takes up the task of distinguishing the sophist, the statesman, and the philosopher, but Plato never gives him the chance to complete the trilogy, for its best and most important part is missing. Or is it? Considered as the dyad that it is, sophist, statesman fits snugly between Euthyphro and apology, and this suggests the following, that at the very moment that the ignorant Athenians are about to condemn Socrates to death, that Plato gives his most sophisticated readers the chance to do the very same. If they think that Plato has outgrown Socrates and has found in the Eleatic stranger the new kind of language-based analytic philosophy which continues to entrance my fellow English speakers, they understand Socrates just as little as the Athenian jurymen who condemned him to death. And what is even more beautiful is that those who try to defend the stranger by claiming that in describing the sophist and the statesman, he is already shown forth through himself who is the true philosopher, then he has provided us with a perfect example of what he calls the sophist's art of illusion making. For he has persuaded his friends that he has done what Plato has not allowed him to do. The illusion that he has done what he has not done is a perfect illustration of the being of non-being, the difficult concept at the center of Plato's sophist. Why Hipparchus and Minos belong between apology and Crito, and how Law's Epinomis belongs between Crito and Phaedo, Leo Strauss solved the problem when he realized that the Athenian stranger is who Socrates would be, are matters for another day. But for now, the important point, especially for those of you who've been kind enough to read my article, and I apologize for not speaking to you in Spanish. I really do. I wish I had more linguistic capacity. It's very unfair. We wouldn't even have the United States of America without Spain, thanks to Christopher Columbus. And it seems like a very small, especially at a time when my president is, we stole half of the western part of our country from the Spanish-speaking Mexicans. 4 of our largest cities, Los Angeles, San Antonio. It's a schmuck. Excuse me. Is that instead of early, middle, and late, the reading order paradigm regards the dialogues leading up to Symposium and Republic as preparatory or proleptic, the passages where the transcendent and unchanging ideas become luminous as visionary, and the dialogues like Timaeus and the Eleatic dyad that call them into question, if not annihilate, the division between being and becoming, are what I call basimistic, i.e., dialogues of testing. For all great teachers test their students, as we all know. And although Plato was the first to employ the technique in an academic setting, he would not be the last teacher who offered his students multiple choices of which all but one answer were contrived to be deceptively but plausibly false. Let's end with the self-contradiction built into Raphael's famous School of Athens, where Plato is like this, and Aristotle is like that. Where Plato painted Plato pointing heavenward with his right hand, while holding Timaeus in his left. It is true enough that Timaeus, by which I mean the character named Timaeus, began by sharply distinguishing being from becoming, the ontological basis for Plato's skyward finger. But since Timaeus is giving an account of how the cosmos came into being, how it became or came to be, a project that ties Plato's Timaeus to pre-Socratic speculation in becoming generally. And since the three most remarkable elements in his dialogue, that is the demiurgos, the construction of the soul of the world, and the receptacle or chora, all equally tend to blur, to annihilate, to blur, to confuse the hard distinction made by Socrates in books 6 and 7 of the Republic between what is and what merely becomes. Raphael made a very curious choice. It is because Timaeus offers a mixed message as to the reality of transcendent being, as opposed to merely transient becoming, that it will continue to provoke debate. And on one side will be those who argue, on the basis of late dialogues like Timaeus, that Plato abandoned his Platonism, while others will seek for features in those dialogues that prove that he did not. In other words, some Plato scholars are Unitarians and seek to prove the unity of Plato's thought. American Plato scholars are almost always Unitarians, as indeed I am. Others are revisionists and welcome signs that Plato outgrew the dualistic Platonism of his middle period dialogues, and they interpret Plato's development on that basis. I refer to the demiurge, the world soul, and the receptacle as elements, but this is the wrong word. For Timaeus, the elements are earth, air, water, and perhaps most remarkably, perhaps the most remarkable aspect of earth, air, fire, water, and perhaps the most remarkable aspect of his cosmology is the geometrical basis for his doctrine of elements. At one point, he discusses dividing an octahedron. I don't know if you can. An octahedron is made out of 8 equilateral triangles, like boop, 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 boop. And it kind of looks like if you cut it in half, it would create 2 of the Egyptian pyramids. In other words, if it was a solid object and you cut it in half, you'd have 4 equilateral sides standing on a square base. For those who can visualize that, the result would be 2 Egyptian pyramids, each with a square base and 4 sides. But no, says Timaeus, the elements are simply their surfaces, i.e. they are not solids, so that when the octahedron is split, it produces 2 tetrahedra. Now the tetrahedra is the beautiful pyramid, where it's got 4 sides, all of them equilateral triangles, where the 3 sides stand on a triangular base. What creates problems is that Timaeus repeatedly insists that there is no such thing as empty space. There's no canon, there's no void, there's no emptiness. Everything is filled with something material. And the building blocks of matter are these geometrical shapes, these solids. Some of his oddest notions follow from this denial. For what then is inside his surface-only solids? And if the elements are the constituent parts of everything that is, what is between them? Even though tetrahedra, octahedra, and squares can all fit together with themselves in a way that leaves no empty space between them, they can't do that with each other. And the same is not true of the icosahedron that represents air, with which no other element, including itself, can interface without leaving a void, a gap, a void, a space, an emptiness. In the context of Republic 7, none of this is remarkable. There, Socrates says that the guardians will receive instruction not only in geometry, in 2 dimensions, but stereometry, the study of solid shapes. And anyone who knows the first thing about solids can see the problem. Timaeus' elemental theory is impossible, because if those elements are stereometric without being solids, there must be empty space between most of them and inside all of them. Confronted with this problem, scholars have split along similar lines. Like the revisionists, the more tough-minded critics have argued that Plato made a mistake. Plato's more sympathetic defenders, like the Unitarians, have tried to resolve and rationalize the error out of existence. But all of them anchor their positions in what I am comparing to a pre-Copernican assumption. Now, I don't know if this is, I used the word cambio de paradigma. Thomas Kuhn wrote a book on the scientific, the famous example of a paradigm shift is to say, as Galileo said, symbol, it moves, like we are moving. Instead of everything going around us, we are moving. Well, I am comparing the paradigm shift, the pre-Copernican paradigm, is that all of Plato's characters are Plato. And that's a very easy thing to question. But all anchor their positions in what I am comparing to a pre-Copernican assumption. Timaeus speaks for Plato. The split between revisionists and Unitarians points to the need for a paradigm shift. By taking seriously Plato's decision to follow Republic with Timaeus, Basilistic pedagogy provides it. Separating Timaeus the character from Plato the author makes it easy to admit that Timaeus is wrong about the void and about much else, without impugning, without criticizing Plato or accusing him of a lack of intelligence or acuity. Leaving for another time discussion of how the deliberate errors of Plato's characters relate to the famous Socratic paradox that no man errs willingly, the important point with which I will conclude is that if Plato can test his reader's knowledge by placing in the mouth of one of his characters a discourse that deliberately undermines the basic principles of arithmetic, geometry, and stereometry, then he can also do the very same thing with Platonism. In other words, we can celebrate the gap between Republic 7 and Timaeus, along with the revisionists, without abandoning the Unitarianism that allows Plato to remain a Platonist. And that, honored ladies and gentlemen, is what we should be able to allow Plato to be.
Nos queda un rato para preguntas o discusiones. Y bajo con el micrófono para... Si Ricardo quiere subir de nuevo a ayudar o a estar debajo, será un placer.
No, me read.
Hemos entendido muy bien. Bien, primera parte del seminario, el cambio de paradigma, necesidad de establecer un orden de lectura que no tiene por qué ver con el orden de la composición. ¿Alguna pregunta?
What about Mr. Perfect? What was the question you asked?
Yeah, it's better for this afternoon. My question.
Why?
It's about the figure of the professor and the philosopher.
Well, let's talk about it. That's all you ever talk about, so let's do it. Go ahead.
Maybe it's a little bit problematic, but if you want.
Yeah. There's no other question.
Yes.
Give that boy a microphone.
Yeah, where is it?
Right here.
Mi pregunta tiene que ver con la discusión que ayer mantuvieron Fernando Villarán y Will Altman durante 6 o 7 horas, desde que Altman aterrizó en Valencia hasta que, ya viendo que era imprudente seguir discutiendo porque teníamos que madrugar, pues tuvimos que decirnos cortésmente buenas noches. Yo estoy... Bueno, vamos a ver. Si Will Altman está aquí en un capítulo personal es porque leer sus libros o haber conocido su obra personalmente a mí me ha obligado a cambiar muchos de los planteamientos que hasta ahora tenía. Quiero decir, se han hecho muchas alusiones esta mañana a Leo Strauss, pero Will Altman es el autor del libro contra Leo Strauss más poderoso que se vaya a escribir nunca. Quiero decir, he dedicado 25 años de mi vida a estudiar a Leo Strauss para encontrarme con un libro en el que se afirma que Leo Strauss era simplemente un nazi. Naturalmente, además es un libro de 900 páginas que, en fin, hace... Pero a mí esto me parece que es lo que le puede pasar a cualquier persona que se comprometa honestamente con el pensamiento. Hemos de cambiar de pensamiento y de opiniones casi con tanta abundancia como cambiar de ropa. Esta es una razón. Quiero decir, Will Altman me ha obligado a cambiar muchos de los planteamientos que tengo. Diré algo que nos viene sobre el camino. Hemos dedicado en la Escuela de Filosofía 3 o 4 seminarios a Cicerón. En medio de estos seminarios encontré el libro de Altman sobre Cicerón, que me iluminó sobre muchas cosas y oscureció otras cosas que yo creía que estaban claras. Esto es bueno, pero tiene que ver entonces, Fernando, con lo siguiente. En esta discusión sobre si Platón es más un profesor, un teacher o un filósofo. Bueno, fue casi la discusión central con el profesor Negrete en nuestros diálogos. Yo creo que verdaderamente entendemos a Platón, esto lo voy a convertir enseguida en una pregunta, ¿cuándo tenemos que enseñar? Y cuando nos damos cuenta de que enseñar a Platón no es enseñar a Platón, sino enseñar filosofía. O dicho de otra manera, que aquello que la filosofía tiene que enseñar no es un contenido. Por eso, tú que vas a empezar a ser ahora profesor, y yo que voy a dejar de serlo, espero lo antes posible, en este desplazamiento temporal lo que vemos es que cuanto antes hay que poner entre paréntesis, entre comillas, entre corchetes, hacer un epogé del temario que el Estado ofrece a un profesor para que lo ofrezca a sus alumnos. Esa no es la vida de la filosofía. Así que realmente uno se da cuenta de que es la filosofía cuando tiene que enseñar. Y ya no tiene cuando tiene que enseñar a Platón, cuando tiene que enseñar filosofía, sino cuando tiene que enseñar, puesto que enseñar es siempre enseñar filosofía. De otra manera, uno es un mero repetidor de consignas o de dogmas ya establecidos. Y buena parte de los profesores, supongo que no son felices con su trabajo porque no pueden tener la libertad de la que goza el filósofo como profesor. Yo siempre he sospechado que todos los profesores quieren ser profesores de filosofía. Porque ser profesor de filosofía es una redundancia. Un filósofo es fundamentalmente un profesor. Esta es la cuestión. Esto, con la claridad con la que Altman lo explica en el libro central, Clase de Teacher, es un libro extraordinario, creo que no sería esto. Pero es importante por lo siguiente, y hemos empezado esta mañana diciéndolo. La mayor parte de los que estamos aquí esta mañana somos profesores de enseñanza secundaria. Pero eso no es lo relevante. Lo relevante es que debemos darnos cuenta de que efectivamente lo que vaya a ocurrir con una persona para que sea posible que aprenda ocurre fundamentalmente en ese instante en el que abandona la educación obligatoria y antes de pasar a especializarse en el mundo laboral en el que va a vivir, puesto que eso es la universidad, una preparación especializada y competitiva para el mundo laboral, no otra cosa es la universidad en estos momentos, ocurre algo en un periodo de tiempo de 2 o 3 años que es la enseñanza libre del bachillerato, el único momento libre en la vida de un estudiante. Porque ha dejado atrás la educación obligatoria, también ha dejado atrás su peor adolescencia
todavía no está urgido por el tener que ganarse la vida y se encuentra con un momento central de libertad. Es el primer momento de libertad real de un ser humano. Y ahí es donde uno se da cuenta, como lo vas a ver tú en septiembre cuando entres en el aula de bachillerato, de que ahí enseñar filosofía es una redundancia. La filosofía consiste en enseñar. El qué de la filosofía, el ti es irrelevante en contraposición o en comparación con el hecho de que la filosofía es fundamentalmente, y a mí me ha gustado muchísimo cómo plantea Will y cómo nos ha enseñado a leer, o por lo menos cómo he aprendido a leer, que el filósofo tiene que volver voluntariamente a la cabeza. Esta cuestión la hemos discutido continuamente desde la primera palabra de la República, cátedra, bajé. I went down. Esto es importante. Esta es por romper el hielo, pero quiero decir que tú y otros compañeros que están aquí, y a los que felicito por haber obtenido la plaza de profesores, ¿no? Me ha dado una alegría extraordinaria este verano. Es entrar en la caverna. Lo decisivo es esto. Entonces, ya no es importante qué es lo que tengáis que enseñar, sino la reflexión fundamental de que sois los que vais a enseñar. En el momento libre de los seres humanos. En la universidad, los estudiantes no son libres. Son ya mecanismos de un engranaje laboral en el que tienen que ser competitivos. Pero ¿qué ocurre en esos 2 años formidables del bachillerato? Que además son libres y que además son gratuitos y que además no tienen casi nada que ver con casi nada de lo que el estudiante, por mucho que haya bachillerato artístico, bachillerato, en realidad son 2 años libres, en la medida en que ningún gobierno ha logrado ni logrará exterminar por completo la filosofía del bachillerato. En el momento en que eso un gobierno lo hiciera, el bachillerato se desharía como un azucarillo. Esta es la reflexión importante. Esto es lo que creo que efectivamente Will Altman ha visto muy bien al identificar a Platón como, es verdad, es difícil hasta de traducir. En la traducción de Maya Ayuso, a la que agradezco el esfuerzo que ha hecho muy rápidamente de traducir estas conferencias, ¿cómo traducimos teacher? Nuestra palabra maestro, que sería el equivalente si queremos reducir la cuestión de profesor para no ser... ¿Cómo se traduciría correctamente teacher? Al margen de que históricamente profesor tiene que ver con el sofista, no exactamente con el plato de teacher. Reflexionemos algo sobre esto. No, estuvimos hablándolo ayer. Pero necesitaremos el micrófono.
Okay.
¿Ahora sí? Sí. Sí, bueno, no sé si entiendo que tengo que referirme a los dos de alguna manera. Estoy de acuerdo con la mayor parte o casi con la totalidad de las cosas que dices, Antonio. ¿No sé dónde estás? Ah, perfecto. Sí, yo creo que efectivamente el valor de la filosofía, o uno de ellos, es que es lo único gracias a lo cual enseñamos o se enseña, y que todo lo demás es ser agente de una forma de información. Solo el filósofo es el que educa en este sentido, porque es el único que libera en la medida en que enseña a pensar. En esto estoy completamente de acuerdo. Lo que quiero decir con la disputa o la discusión que teníamos ayer y que sugieres tú, es si ser filósofo se agota en ser profesor. Porque me parece, por ejemplo, significativo lo que tanto el profesor Altman como tú habéis puesto de relieve, que es que es importante que el filósofo vuelva a la caverna voluntariamente, no necesariamente en cierto sentido. Esto es como la afirmación más controvertida que quiero plantear, pero creo que expresa adecuadamente lo que quiero decir. Y creo en este sentido que tú no estás de acuerdo con William, en el sentido en el que tú dices que el filósofo, en tanto que profesor, no enseña una serie de contenidos, sino una forma de preguntarse por las cosas. Preguntar por el TST, ¿no? Preguntarse por el qué. Y este sería el contenido formal, por forzar los términos, en el que, o sea, que compondría el currículo adecuado o el currículo adecuado de la asignatura de filosofía de bachillerato, ¿no? O de cualquiera. Pero sí que creo que Will, en este sentido, afirma que el filósofo, en tanto que profesor, enseña a ser bueno, no a preguntarse por el bien. Y aquí sí que creo que llena de contenido algo que convierte al profesor en algo más comprometido que al filósofo. La pregunta, o sea, la forma más gráfica, entiendo, de ilustrarlo sería, por preguntársela a Will, ¿qué diferencia habría entonces entre Jesucristo y Sócrates? En el sentido en el que los dos enseñan un bien que han recibido por contemplación o por revelación, pero si ese bien fuese tan claro y tan sustancial, entiendo que no habría una diferencia cualitativa entre ambos. No sé si... did you understand the basis of my speech, Mr. Altman? Dr. Altman?
I didn't hear a question in it.
What's the difference or the no difference that you see between Socrates and Jesus Christ?
Well, when I was a high school teacher, I would make my students, one of the lists of 5 things I would make them memorize was called the Philosophy 5. And the Philosophy 5 was the Sophists.
Una de las cosas que hacía a sus estudiantes aprender eran los 5 de la filosofía, que son los sofistas,
Sócrates,
Plato, Platón, Aristóteles,
and Alexander the Great.
Y Alejandro el Grande.
And what I meant by that was
¿Qué quería decir con eso?
That the Sophists were relativists.
Era que los sofistas eran relativistas.
That Socrates made them contradict themselves.
Que Sócrates logró que se contradijeran a sí mismos.
That Plato pointed to the absolute good.
Que Platón apuntaba al bien absoluto.
That the doctor's son Aristotle embodied the absolute good back in the world.
Que Aristóteles daba cuerpo al bien absoluto en el mundo.
And Aristotle's student thought he was doing the world a favor by conquering it.
Y que el estudiante de Aristóteles pensaba que estaba haciendo un favor al mundo conquistándolo.
And when I taught them Christianity,
cuando les enseñaba cristianismo,
I taught them what I called the Philosophy 5. I mean the Christianity 5.
Les enseñaba lo que yo llamaba los 5 del cristianismo.
Pontius Pilate,
Poncio Pilatos,
Jesus,
Jesús,
the Gospels,
los Evangelios,
Paul,
Pablo,
Peter,
y Pedro.
And what I meant by that was pretty much the same thing.
Y lo que quería decir con ello era básicamente lo mismo.
That Pontius Pilate says, "What is truth?"
Pilatos se preguntaba qué era la verdad.
And we have an answer for that.
Tenemos una respuesta.
Jesus doesn't write a book.
Jesús no escribe ningún libro.
Socrates doesn't write a book.
Sócrates tampoco.
Socrates gets killed.
A Sócrates lo matan.
Jesus gets killed.
Jesús también.
The Gospels are keeping alive Jesus in the same way that Plato was keeping alive Socrates.
Los evangelios mantienen vivo a Jesús de la misma forma que Platón mantiene vivo a Sócrates.
Paul brings the message a little bit closer down to earth.
Pablo lleva el mensaje un poco más cercano a la tierra.
And Peter creates the possibility for a worldwide hegemony of a Caesaro-papist monarchy that will dominate the Middle Ages.
Y Pedro hace posible un control terrenal del cesaro-papismo que veremos más tarde.
Up to including that we'll get a pope named Alexander in the Renaissance.
Hasta el punto de llegar a tener un papa llamado Alejandro en el Renacimiento.
I usually define... How many high school teachers are in the audience?
¿Cuántos profesores del instituto hay en la audiencia?
I have always defined my profession as the ability to create... That the high school teacher's job is to create illuminating and responsible oversimplifications.
Considera que el trabajo de un profesor es crear sobresimplificaciones iluminadoras y he perdido el otro objetivo. Responsables, gracias.
So, I mean, that's on your specific question. I don't think that's exactly what you mean, though. I think following up from some of the conversations you and I have had is that, I mean, first of all, you know, we're neither of us idiots. I mean, there are obviously philosophers who aren't teachers. There are obviously philosophers that don't have any time to teach.
Evidentemente no somos idiotas, hay muchos filósofos que no tienen...
The very act of writing kind of puts you into the role of being a teacher in any case.
En cualquier forma, el tener que escribir...
Now, I guess it was Ortega y Gasset that said that the courtesy of the philosopher is to be clear. Naturally, that fits into my worldview where Jesus and Plato are trying to motivate a kind of generous nobility of spirit that takes care of other people.
Por lo que tiene que ver con lo que él considera que es propio de Jesús y de Platón, que es generar un espíritu.
Obviously, there are philosophers who are less concerned with teaching than with others.
Hay algunos filósofos menos interesados en enseñar que otros.
And therefore, you can easily make a division between the two.
Y por tanto, puedes dividirlos.
One of the advantages of not making a division between the two,
una de las ventajas de no hacer esa división,
and I take it that this is part of our difference, that I'm less willing to make the difference and you're more willing,
y imagino que eso es lo que nos hace diferentes,
is that some of these other antinomies like philosophy versus poetry,
algunas de las otras antinomias como filosofía y poesía,
or philosophy versus rhetoric,
filosofía y retórica,
tend to disappear.
Tienden a desaparecer.
Because to be a teacher,
porque ser un profesor,
the clarity of the teacher is also the persuasiveness of rhetoric.
La claridad del profesor también es...
And the ability to create poetic images like the cave that teach more than 1,000 words.
Y la habilidad de crear una retórica como la de la caverna necesita más de 1000 palabras.
Now, what seems to me is that there is a kind of hermeneutic circle.
Hay un círculo hermenéutico
that divides you from me.
Que os divide a vosotros.
Because you want those antinomies. You want there to be an incompatibility.
Porque tú quieres una incompatibilidad entre la filosofía.
I'll just trot out what I think you think, and then you can correct me. That I think you're more comfortable with that antinomy than I am.
Yes,
and you're more uncomfortable, and as a result of that, you also are more willing to separate the teacher from the philosopher.
Tú estás más a gusto en las antinomias y por tanto estás más dispuesto a separar al filósofo del profesor.
So it seems to me that the two things are related.
Y considero que están relacionadas las dos cosas.
And what I like is to me, I think you're hitting on something, is that I would often say to my students that the difference between being a teacher and being, say, a shoe salesman,
la diferencia, le dices a los estudiantes entre ser profesor y vendedor de zapatos,
is that when you're a shoe salesman,
que cuando eres vendedor de zapatos,
everybody that comes into your shop, you examine everybody that comes into your shop.
Tú examinas a todos los que entran en tu tienda.
Is this guy going to spend any money, or is he just joking around?
¿Este pavo le va a gastar pasta o está molestando?
Can I show him a high-priced shoe and think that he'll get it, or is he just a cheapskate that's going to try on a shoe and leave?
¿Le puedo colar uno caro o con uno que le venga?
Because if he's the second kind, I'm not going to give him any good service.
Que si es de los segundos, no le voy a dar buen servicio.
I'm going to size up everybody that comes into my shop on the basis of what I can get out of him.
Voy a organizarlos sobre la base de lo que puedo obtener de ellos.
And for a teacher,
para un profesor,
these kind of questions are irrelevant.
Estas preguntas son irrelevantes.
Worse than that, they're unthinkable.
Incluso peor, son impensables.
We're not in the classroom to get anything out of our students.
No estamos en la clase para obtener nada de los estudiantes.
We're in the classroom to improve them to be what they want to be.
Estamos para mejorarlos para que lleguen a ser lo que ellos quieren ser.
They say that when a piece of marble came into a studio,
dicen que cuando un trozo de mármol llega a un estudio,
that Michelangelo could already see the statue inside of it.
Que Miguel Ángel podía ver la estatua que había dentro de él.
And that he envisioned his job as merely cutting away the excess marble.
Y que su trabajo era quitar los restos de mármol que no hacían falta.
To bring out the statue that was already within it.
Para sacar la estatua que ya había dentro de ella.
This is the art of the high school teacher.
Ese es el arte del profesor de secundaria.
Ha dicho que el verdadero filósofo es el que regresa a la caverna. Sin embargo, a mí al leer La República, el libro 7, no veo claro que este sea el pensamiento de Platón. Cuando en el capítulo 5 parece que tiene que convencerle de que vuelva a la caverna, será bueno para la ciudad, no habrá división, el gobernante estará bien preparado y les diremos que se lo deben a la ciudad. Trataremos de crearles un sentimiento de culpa, digámoslo así. Nosotros os hemos dado el ser, nos lo debéis. Pero no me parece que el argumento de Platón sea convincente para según qué tipo de alma. Y por otra parte quiero destacar que... Perdón. For a selfish person is not a convincing argument. Y otra cuestión, quiero destacar que tanto en la salida de la caverna como en la estancia del filósofo fuera, está totalmente solo, no hay comunidad, no hay sociedad.
Well, that's a great question, and also, thank you. I would have to say that I understood your Spanish better than I've understood anybody else's today. Thank you for speaking in that very clear way. The story of the ship, how there's a ship and it's mismanaged and the crew are,
La historia del barco en el que se supone
in book 6.
En el libro sexto, que es gobernado por el capitán.
The philosopher is the one guy that knows about the wind and the waves, and he could run the ship.
El filósofo es el que conoce sobre los vientos y las olas y debe ser el que gobierna el barco.
But he stays apart and indifferent.
Pero se mantiene aparte.
And waits for somebody to ask him.
Y espera que alguien vaya y le pida que lo haga.
Is the antithesis.
La antítesis de la caverna.
And the reason that the philosopher must be a poet and a rhetorician
La razón por la que el filósofo debe ser un poeta y un retórico
is because we're not going to wait around to be begged.
Es porque no vamos a esperar a que se nos pida, se nos suplique.
We're going to go into public school teaching.
Vamos a ir a enseñar.
Or nursing. Or being a nurse.
O ser un enfermero.
Being a fireman.
O ser un bombero, una bombera.
Or being somebody that helps other people.
No ser alguien que ayude a otras personas.
Because it's the only thing that a decent person could imagine themselves doing.
Porque es lo único que una persona decente podría imaginarse
haciendo. Because any asshole can look out for their own good.
Porque cualquier gilipollas puede buscar su propio bien.
And any villain can wait to be begged to benefit others.
Cualquier villano puede esperar a que se le ruegue que ayude a otros.
Wisdom and kindness are without envy.
Pero la inteligencia, la sabiduría y la bondad no tienen envidia.
And when you fall in love with philosophy,
cuando amas la filosofía,
you can't help but want to share it. That's my answer to you. That's my answer to you.
No puedes evitar, no puedes esperar para compartirla.
My answer to you is that when philosophy gets into you, when it gets into you, you cannot not share it.
Cuando la filosofía entra en ti, no puedes no compartir.
There's a great passage in Cicero where he's talking about the contemplative philosopher.
Hay un pasaje en Cicerón que habla del filósofo contemplativo.
And he says that the contemplative philosopher would be miserable.
Y dice que será triste, estará.
Even if he saw the most amazing and beautiful things.
Incluso si viera las más maravillosas e increíbles
he had no one with whom to share them.
Si no tuviera nadie para compartirlo.
And that's the credo of the philosopher.
Y eso es lo fundamental del filósofo.
Impossible not to be a teacher.
Imposible no ser un profesor.
Because you've seen what it did to you.
Porque has visto lo que ha hecho contigo.
And you want to help other people.
Y quieres ayudar a otros.
Whether you want to say that you want to help them avoid the mistakes of the past.
Tanto si es para evitar que cometan los errores del pasado.
Or for some other reason.
O por algún otro razón.
One thing I do know, though.
Algo que sí que sabe.
Is that the most effective high school teachers.
Es que los peores profesores.
Were not goody-goodies when they were young.
No eran
buenas personas cuando eran jóvenes.
They were not getting a little gold star on their homework.
No les ponían estrellitas en su...
It's the most effective high school teachers.
Que los peores profesores
Lazy.
eran...
They didn't work when they were kids.
perezosos, no trabajaban cuando eran
They
niños.
had contempt for their teachers.
Odiaban a sus profesores.
They were assholes.
Eran gilipollas.
But they changed.
Pero han cambiado.
They were converted.
Fueron convertidos.
They know how to convert.
Y saben cómo convertir.
They take the most difficult student.
Toman a los estudiantes más difíciles y les dan la vuelta.
Just the way they got flipped.
Como ellos fueron dados la vuelta.
Just the way Callicles turned into Plato.
Como Callicles se convirtió en Platón.
Just as the asshole that I was turned into me. Well, actually, that's not that big a change.
Como el gilipollas que él era se convirtió en lo que es ahora, aunque no ha sido un cambio tan grande.
Got two, three. Bing, bang, bong. Senora was first. I think this gentleman was second. No? Or didn't you? You okay?
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much for your conference. I don't know the order in which St. Augustine read Plato, but I wonder if the Doctor of Grace would have a significant change on his interpretation of Plato. What do you think if St. Augustine would have had the pleasure to listen to you, to hear the proposal that you have on the order of reading? Thank you.
Mi compañero dice que no sabe en qué orden leyó San Agustín a Platón, pero se pregunta si San Agustín hubiera cambiado algo su pensamiento si hubiera tenido la fortuna de escuchar el orden que propone el profesor.
What's that noise? There we go. Perfect. I didn't quite understand. We know the order in which Augustine wrote the dialogues? Read the dialogues?
Sí, se pregunta si sabemos el orden o si no lo sabemos.
Yo no lo sé.
Dice, no.
Oh, okay, good. So what do I think that Augustine would have thought? Well, I'll throw back a question at you guys, because this is something that I'm really trying to figure out.
Os voy a lanzar la pregunta a vosotros porque es algo que estoy intentando averiguar.
Even before Antonio Lastra sent me an email.
Incluso antes de que Antonio Lastra me mandara un email.
Professor of philosophy from the Pontificia Universidade de Javeriana de Bogotá in Colombia.
Profesor de la Universidad Pontificia de Bogotá en Colombia.
He sent me an email.
Le mandó un email.
And these are the two people that have showed the most interest in my work.
Son las personas que han mostrado, las dos personas que más interés han mostrado en su trabajo.
Alfonso Flores paid me the great compliment.
Alfonso Flores le dio...
Of writing in public on a website. Of writing in public on a website.
De escribir en público en una página web.
That he was a follower of Jesus Christ.
Que era un seguidor de Jesucristo.
Saint Augustine.
San Agustín.
And William Altman.
Y William Altman.
Which I thought was pretty absurd. No, maybe it wasn't Jesus, it was Plato, Augustine, and William Altman. I think that was it.
Era Platón, Jesús.
I really like St. Augustine. I believe that if Augustine knew about me and what I am doing,
y cree que si San Agustín
he wouldn't change any statement that he made one bit.
No hubiera cambiado ni un poquito ninguno de sus enunciados.
Augustine kept the full extent of his Platonism secret.
Porque cree que San Agustín mantuvo la extensión de su platonismo secreto.
I think he saw with great clarity that Plato had anticipated the basis of Jesus' self-sacrifice for the world.
Él vio que Platón había anticipado las bases del autosacrificio de Jesús hecho por el autosacrificio por el mundo.
But that it was unsafe for him to say it in public.
Pero no era seguro decirlo en público en ese tiempo.
I think you can see this very plainly in the Contra Academicos.
Creo que lo podemos ver claramente en el Contra Académicos.
That's my favorite text of St. Augustine.
Es el texto favorito del profesor.
And I can only say that the Augustine that wrote the Contra Académicos,
Y que el Agustín que escribió el Contra Académicos,
I don't see one bit of daylight between him and me.
no hay ninguna diferencia entre él y él.
And I don't believe he would see any difference between, and when he wrote that, I don't think he, the author of the Contra Académicos, would see any difference between me and him.
Y cree que el autor de ese Contra Académicos, que Agustín, tampoco vería ninguna diferencia entre el profesor Altman y el propio Agustín.
I'm not a sufficient scholar of Augustine to tell you about the Augustine that wrote the Civitas Dei.
No es un especialista suficiente en Agustín para hablar de su ciudad de Dios,
Or the Confessions.
o las confesiones,
Or 100 other works, including De Trinitate, that I haven't, read.
u otras cientos de obras como la Trinidad que tampoco ha leído.
But I do think that he simultaneously recognized the same Plato
Pero que simultáneamente reconoció el mismo Platón,
and believed that it was unsafe to make that realization public.
pero pensó que no estaba a salvo para hacer para anunciar.
I mean, although I'm a Christian,
Pese a que soy un cristiano,
I hold the Christians responsible for the elimination of Cicero's Hortensias.
considera que los cristianos son los responsables por la eliminación de las hortensias de Cicerón.
And Augustine famously said in the Confessions,
Como Agustín dijo en las confesiones,
the Hortensias of Cicero had led him to God.
las hortensias de Cicerón le habían llevado hasta Dios.
I think that there were a lot of dogmatic fathers of the church
Cree que ha habido un montón de padres dogmáticos de la Iglesia
that didn't even like the idea of a Jew,
que ni siquiera le gustaba la idea de que un judío,
let alone a pagan,
incluso menos un pagano,
to lead them to God.
les guiara hacia Dios.
So I think it created a necessity for some secrecy.
Por tanto, eso creó una necesidad de secreto en San Agustín.
And my favorite kind of Straussian
Y su favorito tipo de straussiano
would be somebody that used Strauss's methods
sería el que utiliza los métodos de Strauss
on this problem,
sobre ese problema,
something that Strauss himself could never do.
algo que el propio Strauss nunca podría haber
Because
hecho.
Strauss must always find a dark and ugly message between the lines of his authors,
Porque a Strauss le encantaba encontrar
instead of a sublime and beautiful one.
mensajes terribles y asquerosillos en lo que decían.
There are some sublime and beautiful doctrines that are dangerous.
Pero hay algunas preciosas doctrinas que son peligrosas.
If you tell a selfish world that you're an altruist,
Si tú le dices a un mundo egoísta que eres altruista,
everyone will take advantage of you.
todo el mundo se aprovechará de ti.
And if in the midst of the hegemony of the Christian church,
Y si en mitad de la hegemonía de la Iglesia cristiana
say that all men and women
dices que todos los hombres y mujeres
from the beginning of time
desde el comienzo de los tiempos
have known that picking up your cross and following him
hubieran cogido la
and laying down your life for others,
cruz y haberla seguido y haberla dado su vida por los demás,
best thing a human being can do,
y eso es lo más noble que la humanidad puede hacer,
was merely saying what every decent person has already known, just saying it a lot better.
y que Jesús lo único que está haciendo es decir mejor lo que cualquier persona sabía.
A doctrine like that could get you burned at the stake
Una doctrina como esa podría llevarte a la hoguera,
because you would be questioning the hegemony of Jesus.
porque estarías cuestionando la hegemonía de Jesús.
Pagan.
Serías llamado
You'd be a Pelagian heretic. That's what you'd be.
Serías un herético.
Pelagian. And I take it that Augustine was not wanting to be called a Pelagian heretic.
Y no creo que Agustín quisiera ser llamado eso.
So that would be my answer. Thanks for the question. I mean, that's off the top of my head. I don't know enough to answer it well. But
Es lo que se le ocurre, no tienen los...
but what I can say is that in the Contra Académicos, that what Augustine clearly demonstrates
Lo que demuestran los contraacadémicos
is a understanding of the reading order of Cicero's dialogues
es un entendimiento del orden de lectura de Cicerón
that makes him really the closest ally I've got among the great philosophers.
lo que lo hace el aliado más cercano que él tiene entre los grandes
You might
filósofos.
remember in the Contra Académicos
Que puede que recuerdes en esa orden contraacadémica
the young soldier Trigetius
que el joven soldado
has only read the Hortensias,
solo ha leído los hortensios.
whereas that other kid, I forget his name, Alypius, I can't remember the other guy,
Que otro muchacho, el que no recuerdo ahora el nombre,
he's already read the Academica.
ha leído los académicos.
So he thinks that Cicero is just a skeptic.
Por tanto, piensa que Cicerón solamente es un escéptico.
And what Cicero did then is that he kind of reveals the truth in Hortensius and then calls it into question in the Academicus. Just the same way Plato does.
Lo que hace Cicerón es exponer la verdad en los atenienses y luego
and unfortunately,
hace otra cosa en los otros.
Our Christian forebears, our Christian...
sorry, when before...
unfortunately?
Desafortunadamente,
our Christian forebears
nuestros antecesores cristianos
were a lot more comfortable with Cicero the skeptic
estaban más cómodos con el escéptico Cicerón
than with the Cicero who had led St. Augustine to God.
Que con el Cicerón que llevó a San Agustín hacia Dios.
And that's why we don't have the Hortensius any.
Y ahí es donde ya tenemos los hortensios llanos.
In my view.
En su opinión.
Great question, thanks.
Hola de nuevo. ¿Se oye bien? Sí. Bien, respecto a la frase que ha salido en el texto que he leído ahí, en el Power, si no puede enseñarse la virtud, entonces, ¿qué estamos haciendo aquí? Ok. Mi pregunta es, ¿la virtud está ya dentro de nosotros? Por lo tanto, nosotros somos personas que enseñamos desde nuestras creencias. Y por lo tanto, sí que es importante el mármol que elijamos para hacer la escultura. Porque partimos de unas tradiciones y prejuicios. Entonces, cualquier persona puede enseñar siempre que escoja un punto de vista y crea en él. Incluso Hitler pensaba que estaba salvando al mundo. ¿Era un virtuoso?
No. Look, first of all, what's that wonderful Spanish movie about? It's got the word butterfly in it, I think. It's what's that movie called? The Tongue of the Butterfly. He's a teacher. And he's carted off by the Nazis and is denied by his student and his family.
La historia es de un profesor que es asesinado por los nazis en este caso.
One of the nice things, I'm sure there are some fascist school teachers.
Y que es rechazado por su propio estudiante. Él piensa que seguro que hay profesores fascistas.
In fact, I seem to remember that in Germany,
quiero recordar que en Alemania,
that there was a Nationalsozialistischer Lehrerbund.
Había, imagino, era un claustro de profesores nacionalsocialistas.
And you could only join if you took an oath of loyalty to Adolf Hitler.
Y solo podías ser parte si jurabas lealtad a Hitler.
In my own work,
su propio trabajo.
I've seen a lot of Plato scholars who were Nazis.
He visto un montón de profesores de Platón que eran nazis.
But I have to believe that in the overall picture of things,
pero debo pensar que en la visión general,
that the majority of teachers,
la mayoría de los profesores,
will always be anti-fascist.
Siempre serán antifascistas.
Because it's not a very good profession if you really want to be ambitious.
Porque no es una buena profesión si eres ambicioso.
You can make more money and gain more power in any number of other ways.
Puedes hacer más dinero de otras muchas formas.
And I take it that a good example of this is the Jesuit order.
Y creo que un buen ejemplo es la orden jesuita.
I mean, when the Jesuits began,
cuando los jesuitas comenzaron,
they were clearly doing everything they could to increase the power of the papacy.
Estaban haciendo todo lo posible para incrementar el poder del papado.
And I take it there were plenty of Jesuits that are hunting down people that didn't believe as they did.
Y creo que cazaban a gente que eliminaban a gente que no pensaba como ellos.
But in these days,
pero en estos días,
The Jesuits seem to be one of the most open-minded members of the church community.
Los jesuitas parecen ser uno de los
And I think it's
más
because of the
abiertos.
great tradition of teaching in the Jesuit order.
Y creo que tiene una gran tradición como profesores.
In other words, the basic principle of teaching will come out.
Por tanto, el principio básico de la enseñanza aparece.
Which isn't to teach somebody to see black even if it's white, or white even when it's black, as Loyola said.
Que no es enseñar a alguien a ver negro cuando es blanco o blanco cuando es negro,
To genuinely celebrate the educational enterprise.
sino celebrar la enseñanza como actividad.
I don't personally find in the United States much of what you were describing.
No encuentro en Estados Unidos mucho de lo que tú estás describiendo.
Most American teachers
Casi todos los profesores americanos
try their very best to be neutral,
intentan ser neutrales, lo intentan,
to the point of fact where they conceal whatever they think from their students
hasta el extremo de ocultar lo que piensan a los
in the name of
estudiantes
objectivity.
en nombre de la objetividad.
I never tried to do that.
Yo nunca he intentado hacer eso.
I tried to have views that were so confusing
He intentado tener visiones que son tan confusas
that no student could possibly imitate.
que ningún estudiante pudiera imitar.
And I saw my job as taking strong positions,
Y veo mi trabajo como tomar
usually on the
posiciones,
side of the losing side,
generalmente a favor de los que pierden,
to provoke them into coming up with their own ideas.
para provocarles y que lleguen a sus propias ideas.
One day I was asked to give a guest lecture in a class,
Una vez fui invitado a una conferencia
and they were very smart students.
a unos estudiantes muy listos.
A few days later I saw one of them,
Algunos días más tarde vi a uno de ellos
and she said, "Mr. Altman,
y me dijo, señor Altman,
that was a very inciting lecture that you just gave."
esa fue una clase muy interesante.
She said, "Inciting."
Y yo, dice insight,
And I said,
muy profunda.
"What did you say?" And she said it was a very exciting lecture.
Pensó que había dicho profunda, inciting, pero el estudiante dijo exciting, excitante, entretenida.
And I said, "But that's not what you said at first. You said inciting, right? Now, what is that? How do you spell that?" I said, like, if it was inciting, would you spell it I-N-C-I-T, like to incite a riot?
Ok, el estudiante había cambiado la palabra que había dicho y dice, pero no es la misma que soy yo al principio. Habías dicho inciting como profunda o exciting. Si has dicho inciting, ¿cómo la deletreas? ¿Como algo que incita o como algo profundo?
Or does it come from the noun insight?
O viene de reflexión.
And that means that inciting as a verb would mean to plant insight in someone.
Que quiere decir plantar dentro de alguien.
Because I realized that was the best compliment I'd ever gotten as a teacher.
Porque se dio cuenta de que era el mejor piropo, el mejor
Because I
que habían
didn't
hecho.
damn whether they embraced my ideas.
Porque le importa un pito si abrazan sus ideas.
I wanted to plant insight in them.
Él quería plantar dentro de ellos.
As in, fuck, what a great idea. I just had an idea, Mr. Altman, I just had an idea. Do you know the movie The Dead Poets Society?
¿Conocéis la película Club de los Poetas Muertos?
Where the shy boy doesn't want to give his poem.
Con el tímido que no quiere hablar.
I don't have a poem, he says.
No tengo un poema.
Oh, so he thinks he's no good, he's got nothing in him, he can't make a poem.
Sí que pensamos que no sirve para nada, no tiene nada en él.
What do you see up there? A madman.
Mira esa foto, ¿qué ves ahí?
Hey, give him an adjective. A sweaty-toothed madman.
¿Qué ves ahí? Es un hombre loco de dientes sudorosos.
That scene where he recites, it's like they tear it and rip it, and there's nothing left, and it's all darkness, and you're left alone, and you're crying and weeping, and you can't. And just Robin Williams just sinks down on his knees and looks up at that boy. That boy has become a poet. That's what a teacher is.
El momento en el que en la peli Robin Williams consigue que el chaval vea la fotografía y la describa como un tipo zumbado de dientes sudorosos es el momento en el que Robin Williams ha conseguido que el chaval se convierta en un poeta, que de verdad de dentro de él salga algo que sea capaz de ser nueva expresión de algo. Y ahí es cuando Robin Williams se arrodilla y lo señala como, daos cuenta de que ahí está un poeta que ha surgido ante vuestros ojos.
So I understand the danger you're pointing to.
entiende el peligro al que te está refiriendo.
And obviously there's some bad teachers.
Y evidentemente algunos malos profesores.
And obviously you can mislead people in all kinds of ways.
Y evidentemente puedes llevar a la gente por malos caminos en muchas formas.
I have to believe that most of the people that would do that
Pero creo que la mayor parte de la gente que hace eso
become bankers,
se convierten en banqueros,
lawyers,
abogados,
politicians,
políticos,
stockbrokers,
agentes de bolsa
and shoe salesmen.
Y vendedores de zapatos.
Perdón, ¿había alguna otra mano?
Buenos días, profesor Altman y todos los demás. Me gustaría saber cómo interpretar las ideas platónicas que aparecen en la República, según las cuales hay clases sociales diferentes según las naturalezas de cada individuo, y solamente una de esas clases sociales, solamente una parte de los individuos están destinados a recibir educación filosófica. Y relacionado con esto, pues la teoría del filósofo gobernante, según la cual el filósofo es el que ha de gobernar.
Okay. So the I've wanted to write a book called Plato the Teacher about all of his dialogues since I was 20 years old.
Desde que tenía 20 años quise escribir un libro llamado Platón el profesor sobre los diálogos.
But because it's such a big topic,
Pero dado que es un tema tan grande,
I never even began writing it.
ni siquiera comencé a escribirlo.
One day, I realized an amazing thing.
Un día me di cuenta de algo increíble.
That I could begin writing a book on the Republic.
Que podía empezar a escribir un libro sobre la República.
Rather than beginning at the beginning.
En lugar de empezar desde el principio.
Because I knew how to teach the Republic.
Que sabía cómo enseñar la República.
The basis of my reading of the Republic.
Las bases de mi lectura de la República.
And it's the insight from which all of my others come from originally.
Y de la reflexión de la que el resto vienen.
Is the definition of justice built on the three different classes?
Es que la definición de justicia construida sobre las tres diferentes clases,
which is then transferred into the definition of justice in the soul based on the three different parts of the soul.
Que luego es transferida a la definición de justicia en el alma basada en las tres distintas partes del alma.
That approach to justice,
que esa aproximación a la justicia,
is what is described in the second highest part of the divided line.
Es lo que se describe en la parte más alta, en la mitad más alta de la línea platónica.
In the second part of the divided line, he says there is the intelligible realm.
En la segunda parte, en la parte más alta, se define el mundo de lo inteligible.
And in the lower part of the intelligible realm,
y en la parte más baja de ese mundo,
you have to start from a hypothesis.
Tienes que empezar de una hipótesis.
Which you do not question.
Que no cuestionas.
And you need to use images.
Y utilizas imágenes.
Glaucon says, I don't understand.
Glaucon dice que no lo pilla.
Well, for example, mathematics, says Socrates.
Por ejemplo, matemáticas, dice Sócrates.
Geometry, you have to start out with an assumption that there are triangles.
En geometría has de empezar con una asunción de
you need to have
triángulos.
diagrams of them.
Y necesitas diagramas de esos triángulos.
What I realized with the force of lightning
de lo que me di cuenta con la fuerza de un relámpago
is that the entire shorter way, climaxing in book 4,
es que
the camino más corto,
es que el camino más corto al que se llega en el libro cuarto
is based exactly on those methods.
Está basado justamente en ese método.
We'll assume that justice in the man and justice in the city are the same.
Donde parece que la justicia en el hombre y en la ciudad son lo mismo, y esa es una
and a false one, I might add.
Y una falsa hipótesis, diría él.
And if we can find wisdom in the city,
si podemos encontrar sabiduría en la ciudad,
and we can find courage in the city,
y podemos encontrar valentía en la ciudad,
and we can find temperance in the city,
y podemos encontrar temperancia en la ciudad,
will be its justice.
Lo que quede, lo que no sea eso, será justicia.
When justice ends up being the one job for which each that each class will only do the one job for which it has been trained,
Cuando la justicia significa que cada clase hace lo que está entrenada para hacer,
that merely repeats the initial hypothesis
eso casi repite la hipótesis inicial
on which the city was based from the start.
Sobre la que la ciudad estaba basada desde el principio.
Because the division of labor is the first thing that he lays down about the city.
Porque la división del trabajo es lo primero sobre lo que fundamenta la
And so
ciudad.
the division of labor ends up being justice at the end.
Y por tanto la división del trabajo acaba siendo la justicia al
And
final.
this too is anticipated in the second part of the divided line.
Y esto también es anticipado en esa segunda parte de la línea.
Because he says that because it can't get away from its hypothesis,
Porque dice que no te puedes librar de esas hipótesis
it must always return to where it began.
y tiene que volver siempre a donde empezó.
When he transfers the city into the soul,
Cuando transpire la ciudad en el
he
alma,
actually calls the law of non-contradiction
él se refiere a la ley de no contradicción,
a hypothesis,
una hipótesis,
which is his clue.
lo que es la pista.
But it's not the only hypothesis.
No es la única hipótesis.
The whole process beginning in Book 2
Todo el proceso que se inicia
is based on a series of hypotheses,
está basado en una serie de hipótesis
and all of them depend on an image of a city.
y todas dependen de una imagen de la ciudad.
So my answer is no.
Por tanto, su respuesta es no.
The three classes of the city
Las tres clases
have nothing to do with what Plato thinks.
no tienen nada que ver con lo que piensa
The
Platón.
noble lie is a lie.
La mentira piadosa es una mentira.
There is no caste system.
No hay sistema de castas.
We're not Hindus.
No somos hindúes.
Maybe it's harder for some people to become philosophers than others. I don't know.
Quizás es más difícil para algunos ser filósofos, quizá.
I've had some very smart students that don't have any philosophy in them.
Tiene algunos estudiantes muy inteligentes
And I've had some students that other people thought that were very slow that had plenty of it.
y he encontrado algunos más lentos que tienen mucha filosofía.
The first shall be last and the last shall be first.
Los primeros serán los últimos y los últimos serán los primeros.
The construction of a city,
Pero la construcción de la ciudad,
its three classes,
con sus tres
and
clases,
its three parts of the soul,
sus tres partes del alma,
allows Socrates to do what the boys want him to do.
le permite a Sócrates hacer lo que los muchachos quieren.
Prove that a well-ordered soul
Probar que existe un alma bien ordenada,
is better than having a disordered soul.
que tener un alma bien ordenada es mejor que tener una desordenada.
But the Republic doesn't end in Book 4.
Pero la República no acaba en el
It
libro,
doesn't end in Book 5.
no acaba en el quinto.
And anybody that's got a soul
Cualquiera que tenga un alma
can see that the high point of it is in the beginning of Book 7.
puede ver el punto de comienzo del libro séptimo
And that the just man of Book 4
y que el hombre justo del libro cuarto,
makes a unity out of himself,
que hace de sí mismo una unidad,
combines the three parts of his soul into a unity.
que combina las tres partes del alma en una unidad,
That's the way the three classes in the city function as a unity.
de la misma forma que las tres clases de la ciudad
Handling in the actions of the other.
trabajan como una unidad dependiendo las unas de las otras.
Well-balanced philosopher
Ese filósofo bien equilibrado
would never go back down into the cave.
nunca volvería a la caverna.
That's what he wants us to do.
Y eso es lo que quiere que hagamos Platón, volver.
Did you feel you got an answer?
¿Has-
Este filósofo bien equilibrado nunca volvería a la cabeza.
No, it's off then. Okay.
Me ha parecido entender con la afirmación, este filósofo bien equilibrado nunca volvería a la caverna.
No, he looks only to the internal order of his own soul.
Solamente estaría centrado en el orden interno de su alma.
And going back into the cave isn't a very pleasant thing.
Y volver a la caverna no es algo agradable.
You're not sure you did the right thing.
No sabes si habrás hecho lo correcto.
You get your feelings hurt every time somebody hates you.
Tienes ese sentimiento de que alguien te odia en todo momento.
If there's some people that are strong enough to enjoy being persecuted,
Si hay alguien suficientemente fuerte para disfrutar ser perseguido,
I'm not one of them.
él no es uno de ellos.
You'll notice it's a funny thing about teacher movies.
Te darás cuenta de que hay una cosa divertida en las películas de profesores.
Robin Williams gets fired.
Robin Williams es despedido.
Jaime Escobar
gets fired.
Jaime Escobar es despedido.
In the typical teacher movie,
En la típica película de
the
profes,
teacher gets into trouble,
el profesor acaba en problemas,
like Socrates does.
como Sócrates.
So that's not fun.
Y no es divertido.
It would be easier to keep your well-balanced soul
Sería más fácil mantener tu alma
serenely
centrada,
focused on acquiring a good pension,
serenamente enfocada en adquirir una buena pensión,
keeping a good balance between your personal and your professional life,
mantener un buen balance entre tu vida
not
personal
taking your school home with
pública,
you,
no llevártela al colegio a casa,
not allowing the fact that a student hates you to bite into your soul that you can't sleep that night,
y no permitir que la idea de que un estudiante te odia te impida dormir una noche,
not caring if you don't reach all of your kids.
que no te importe si no llegas a todos tus muchachos.
But if you're going to be a great teacher,
Pues si vas a ser un gran profesor, una gran profesora,
you're going to be richly rewarded,
vas a ser más recompensado,
but your heart will be broken again and again.
pero tu corazón estará roto cada 2 por 3.
Hemos llegado a la hora, we must rest. A las 5 de la tarde nos vemos en la Universidad Católica, en la calle Jorge Juan, para continuar con nuestro seminario. Bien, muchísimas gracias a todos.